On the 18th of October of 2022, the EMA declared officially that safety pharmacological studies were never performed, never, and they were never deemed necessary. That damn vaccine that is deadly, known to be deadly, not because of the mRNA, but just because of the lipids that are packaging the mRNA. That all gene-based vaccines, independent of manufacturers, produce the same result in the vaccinees. He has looked at 15. In the last 4 days, the number has been increased to 70 individuals who died after vaccination. These were people who died at home, at work, in the car, doing their sports, etc., etc., etc. There's no question now anymore about what is going on. And the answer is in the organs of these people. In 90%, he found clear evidence for autoimmune self-attack by killer lymphocytes on the tissues.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Friday, June 7th, 2024. I always forget that the opening after that clip is sped up like half a step, and it drives me crazy. But I think that's an important clip to start with today. It's actually a combination of two clips of Dr. Bhakdi. And I recommend, again, you check out the amazing interview Taylor Hudak had with Dr. Bhakdi a long time ago for the Last American Vagabond, more than one, I believe, and I believe I've interviewed him as well. But we're going to start today with an important focus on one of the baffled claims, and I'm going to use that in the title for a reason. This one is about specific sperm motility, or rather the way its movement, and 22% reduction. And this is baffling, despite the overwhelming body of evidence showing a reproductivity overlap fertility problem due to the injections, and about 45 of the things I could list off that are currently surrounding you in your home, the clothes you're wearing, all around you. But we're baffled, guys. We're baffled, pointing to some arbitrary concept of well visits and shutting down hospitals. I mean, it's just absurd what they're pointing to. Dr. Bhakdi, at least the second clip, the other one is a little bit later down the line, but the second half of what I played there to open, I believe that was from 2020. I mean, for sure, he was calling this out in 2020. 2021, it could have been overlap right there that when he was saying that. The point is, he was one of the earliest, and I always like to give him credit for this, as far as I could tell, one of the earliest doctors that were not just going, we see a problem, but we're taking a stand and saying, these are killing people. And every one of these gene-based vaccines are dangerous. And that's why I overlapped with that first part of it. That you need to make you understand, if you haven't seen that it's not about this, or it's the combination of all of these things. But the point he makes is you don't need any of the rest of it. Just the lipid envelope is dangerous. Just the mRNA is dangerous. The spike protein that it makes, regardless of what variant they're pointing to, is dangerous. And then any number of other overlaps we've highlighted that go into some much darker stuff. Very important that we understand this. So I wanted to do another point on this to start, because I do sense this coming a little bit right now, and I wanted to refocus some of this stuff. We're going to do another quick point about some bird flu overlaps, kind of a follow-up, a lot of this stuff to yesterday's conversation. And then we're going to get to a lot of the stuff that we didn't highlight yesterday, but a couple of additions, of course, that I think are important. And I will make a point about the UN blacklist conversation for Israel, which apparently is exactly what happened, or is happening right now. Which, shout out to Orwell for highlighting that Israeli coverage of it, because we were well ahead of that story in most cases, aside from the Israeli coverage. And it's important to see that this is developing in a direction that is not whatever your thoughts about the UN. And I have just as many, trepidations and concerns about that body. It's an easily proven fact what they're doing and what they've been doing to his Palestinian children and other places in the world, other genocides they've been involved with. We're also, of course, like we talked about yesterday, I'm gonna discuss Ukraine and Russia a little bit. That I want to highlight some points. Of course, the $225 million aid package on top of the billions that have already gone. While, I mean, any number of other things. We'll get into a lot of this. I won't flesh it out at the opening, but the idea that there's so many things that Americans, understanding this is your tax dollars, that Americans outwardly say, I mean, both Republicans and Democrats want, other than ongoing wars and forever wars, whether it's Trump or Biden. And yet they just decide otherwise. This is the reality we need to come to terms with, that we don't live in, whether you want to call it a democracy, a representative government. That's not what we live in. If they have the simple power to just be like, well, we don't care what any of you think. Here's what everybody thinks. Even in Congress, there's pushback, and we're just going to do what we decide is the right thing. Now, some people may point at that and say, well, we want moral leaders that will do what they believe is right, until you realize that that's not even remotely what they actually think or even what they're actually doing. It's about telling you that so you pretend that they're just making the moral decision. But then, even if you think that's actually what they're doing, stand back and recognize that that's counter to what we're supposed to believe this is, that they are acting the living embodiment of their constituencies or of the American people. That's not even remotely what I can't, whether we're talking about polls from the height of that conversation to now or even before, Americans do not want these wars. They don't want more endless wars. They've been saying that since after Iraq. And these are polls from all sides of the paradigm. And yet they just keep doing it. And then you realize that they're arming neo-Nazis and they're ignoring open atrocities while blaming Russia for things that they're actively doing everywhere, or that Israel is doing more than anyone's ever seen in their lifetime, while ignoring all of that. It's hard to understand and really accept until you dive through the story and realize that this is always what they've been doing, siding with the wrong people, if not the bad guys, if you want to play that, binary view, going with the people that are capable of the worst things because they're easier to control, they're easy to influence, and usually the people that don't want to be controlled by a foreign country, the ones that are typically more moderate, that care about their people's interests, are the ones they do not want to work with because they won't just bow to what foreign interests want. So they go with the bad guys. This is the history of the U.S. government, guys. We need to understand how self-evident this really is. We're going to talk about the ceasefire. We're going to talk about the UNRWA bombing. And of course, a lot of overlaps around that, the food aid conversation, which, the perfect example that I've been highlighting, we're going to talk about today, where actually now I've been kind of pushing the more than they've ever had in their lifetimes, but that is what they're actually pushing. They're actually saying this today in one of these new clips, the new representative, which I think is hilarious. They're just going every week. It seems like a new person's being shoved in your face because they're just losing clout with all the manipulations and lies you're getting caught for. But saying that they have put more, we'll get to it in a second. It's the same point. How many times they've lied about this, and while children are increasingly starving right in front of our eyes. And your government is acting like this is never a problem. There's no crimes being committed. We'll investigate. We'll get back to you. It just never stops. And there's a million different ways you can look at this, about the idea that they're blocking aid in the first place, which everyone, including the U.S., is admitted to, which makes the arming of them illegal. There's everything about this is verifiably wrong. Whether you're talking about law, morals, doesn't really matter. That's why, why I titled it the way I did today. It's frustrating to me that we're covering a lot of these stories, and it's we're supposed to pretend that you should break information, whether it's independent media or someone much larger, because these things are around the world. People are talking about this stuff. And so we go, okay, they just murdered all these children. They just bombed a bunch of foreign aid workers. Shouldn't that be the end of the conversation? No, it just keeps going. And so my point is that if to title something or highlight the information in the title or break these things down, I don't know how to title these things anymore. More conversation of food aid that they're lying about, more bombing of schools. Yes, I could title it that way, but the point is it seems like, I don't even know how to word this properly. It's infuriating that we highlight that they're lying, that they highlight that they're breaking the law. We highlight that everyone apparently seems to be aware of that, except Matt Miller lies about it. And it just keeps happening. I've said this many times. I don't mean to break this down in the opening. It's this block that we're at. And I honestly want your thoughts on how we get past something like that. Now, I just don't want to accept that that we let them finish their genocide before something actually changes, even if that's actually what's going to happen. I don't believe that. I think they're going to do everything they can, as hard as they can, to avoid any accountability, like always. But isn't there You know my thoughts, the two-party paradigm, the people on either side of that pointing at the wrong people ultimately keep this going. But I feel that everybody else kind of begins to notice that to some degree. So how do we get past that? But more to talk about on that in general. Let me know your thoughts. I think it's important that we keep asking these questions and not just get reactive to what's currently being put in front of us. We need to seek solutions. This is why I'm such an, Derek Bros is such an important part of the Last American Vagabond, as well as running the Conscious Resistance, which you should check out. But I just, really respect what he does and what he fights for, because he is actively putting out solutions in everything that he does, which I do my best to do as well. But, we have different focuses. I'm more about trying to break down the immediacy of the lies that are coming forward. And that's why I bring people like that into the fold of TLAV, so we can have that aspect of it, because he does really bring the solution to the table. We need to be thinking about that in everything that we do. So let me know what you think on that. But, and by the way, he is going to be putting out today, I believe, the second follow-up to the Bethany Christian Services series that he'll be doing more than, I believe, than just the 2 parts. But I also want to start with a couple of opening things before we get into the starting point of the COVID-19 conversation, or rather specifically the COVID-19 injection conversation. I wanted to make sure you saw this follow-up, which is in regard to Stripe. I briefly mentioned it yesterday in the middle of the show, but I wanted to make sure you guys saw this. So first, it's very clear that they're kind of coming after just me. I've even spoke to people, and I'm not going to call anybody out, because the last thing I want is for somebody to lose as well, because I'm upset that, it's only focused on me. But I know people that are doing exactly the same thing, not crowdfunding or fundraising, but putting out a digital product, putting out their interviews and their shows. And then just, instead of going, I'm charging $50, you just say, you give me what you think it's worth. Right? That's what we do. That's what all of us do. That's, you can call it donation based, but it's not just for nothing. It's obviously value for value, nod to no agenda in that conversation. It's important. And so I know other people that are using Stripe in even using the exact same plugin that I am, which is what I heard about it from. No, and in some cases bigger than me, and nothing. I hope that doesn't happen to anybody else. My point is, I feel this is very focused on me, which just frustratingly seems to happen a lot. And I don't, it's not because I think it's all about TLAV, but I just look around and I don't see it happening anywhere else. And so one, I want you to know that we interestingly just engaged with them today. They responded on Twitter, and they're looking into it apparently, despite the fact that I've already gone back and forth numerous times. Don't feel like it's going to go anywhere, but I hope it does. I always hope there's some level of honesty out there, and even within these companies, and even within the censorship tactics, like the other people that just don't believe that's how they should be doing this. So my point to say that I want you guys to know, if you are supporting us through Stripe or any of the other tangential connections to that, because locals, that's what it uses. I mean, any number of things that seem like they may be cutting their access to my access to. Because my point on this is, it seems to be only focused on the direct donations from my website, while allowing the other ones to continue, even through Stripe. It doesn't make any sense. It's the same account, and they're only going after the one, weirdly enough, that has the same, it's something like $3,000 a month we get just from that, all utilized every month for the work we put out. I don't want to get into the personal side. I mean, there's even right now, there's months where I end up having to tap into personal to make this stuff happen, because the work is more important to me. Making sure we get multiple articles with Robert and Derek, and interviews from Taylor, and on and on. The point is that they only go after the one that is about you guys donating or supporting through funding our work, about the products we put out. And so if you're doing through Stripe right now, my advice is to just don't do anything. Not yet. I will let you guys know right like this in the beginning of a show, if this comes to a point to where they pull it. At this moment, it's frozen, and I can't even take the funds out under the argument that they're reviewing it again. So maybe that's a positive thing. Hard for me to say that. But when it comes to a point to where I know for sure that I'm not going to be able to use it, the first thing I will do is let you guys know, so you can hopefully find another avenue to support TLAV. And I worry that if we don't say anything, that they'll just keep letting you put money in there and not give it to me, which has happened on damn near every other platform we've been censored from. Patreon, PayPal. Right now, as far as I can tell, there are still people that are signed up for our Patreon that still get money taken every month. I've made this point periodically over the years. I think it's ridiculous, but I shout it out every time, and people still let it go. But in any case, I'll let you know what's going on with this as I understand it. As I just put it out again, this is what they actually responded to, I think. Yeah, they said, oh, here we are, we're responding to DMs. So I simply said, hey, support, can you tell me why, despite proving in my appeal that what we do doesn't meet your claim of crowdfunding, based on their definition of it? And I also added, as you're integrated with numerous crowdfunding platforms, which doesn't make much sense to me, yet only seem to apply this to TLAV. Remember, they updated this in April. They just added this weird content creation caveat that says you're not allowed to crowdfund or rather take without a digital product, which we clearly have. It's not being applied anywhere else. This seems to be specific to only this one thing, even though they're integrated with crowdfunding platforms. So explain for me how you're not allowed to crowdfund, except you can use Stripe for crowdfunding over here on this platform. You get my point, guys? So this is, even if you deem that's what we're doing, which it's not, we put out products, we have one-on-one engagement, we have interviews, we have all sorts of stuff that people then donate to support us through that. Or you could argue, pay for those products in the same way. It's not for free. It's not for nothing. That's the main point we're making. And they seem to accept that in the last discussion we had, but yet they're still freezing the account. So get this some reach, share this if you want, get it in front of people. But if you choose that you want to go another route, email, or rather direct mailing, which seems to be the safe route right now. Our Subscribe Star has never been messed with. Even the Buy Me a Coffee was just frozen, but they unfroze it. So I'm just, I'm concerned about that. Who knows what's going to happen next, but any number of things that we still have out there you can use. Or cryptocurrency donations, or, in the chat, let me dump those in their chat, you guys, if you can let them know where else to support us. There's a lot of other ways. Direct donate on the platforms like Rumble and Rockfin and plenty of other things. In any case, I just want to make sure you guys saw that, because I am worried about where this goes. And to be very forward with you guys, if this does get yanked, it's a huge knock for us. This is what's so frustrating is we just had a very successful fundraiser, which, by the way, that's the other angle, the Give, Send, Go that I'm not mentioning clearly, which does seem to continue to come my way, but that also utilizes, that goes directly to my bank account. Never mind. My point was Give, Send, Go. Remember, they've seemed to have been yanking my recurring donations. And best I can tell, I don't want to say I know for sure, but everyone they've engaged with, they've sent me all of their back and forth, and their banks say there's no problem. Of course, they could be lying. And what the common denominator is that the people that sign up for recurring donations don't seem to continue to recur and donate to me. They get a message that says, you have now been canceled. It doesn't make much sense to me. But the point is, you could go there if you'd like. And I do seem to continue to get at least the one-time donations through the Give, Send, Go. But that itself seems to be shut down in the same kind of way. Where was I going? The point was that, in any case, if you want to support us, there's lots of ways you can. I was going to make a final point there about it. I just am worried about where this goes. Oh, that's what it was. That ultimately we did this fundraiser, right? That was important, and it went very well. We hit our mark, and the whole was about getting the recurring, which that's why I made that point. But then right after that, and again, that's why I kind of went back to, I was worried about the writing, and I pulled it back for a second, but then went right back to it. They're writing just like they were before, because I felt like we had a good place. I was able to cover some of the lawyer fees, and now my point is this knock happens right after that. Knocking off a huge, which was a recurring amount, which is far worse than a one-time thing. And so now I'm worried about the future next steps, about where we're going to go with these lawsuits and everything else. I just want you guys to know where we're at. And that's not even really about trying to solicit donations. It's just about you guys understanding that I'm very concerned about where this goes in the future based on this very clear political and financial censorship. But that is what it is. I'm not going to stop no matter what. Like I said, no matter how I have to do this, I will continue. So that being said, I want to make sure you guys understand where we are. A couple of other opening points. I thought this was interesting based on the idea of where your money goes. Really graceful highlights a tweet from Insider Paper saying, breaking, U.S. to send, as we'll talk about in a minute, $225 million military aid package on top of all the other money that's been there and all the money we don't see going there, laundering and so on. Social Security, she says, is supposed to run out by 2035. All of our tax dollars get washed through Ukraine or are sent to genocide Palestinians. Israel gets free healthcare through our tax dollars. Why are we paying taxes? That's a good question without all of that. Seeing as how it's not really about freedom when you're being forced to pay taxes. Don't you remember at least what we're told we revolted from Britain? The whole taxation without representation. Well, here we are. Damn, same thing, far worse today. But she says sales tax on used items says not even just income tax, but sales tax on used items that have already been taxed. We're being manipulated. Our government is stealing from us every which way we can look, and then taking that money and helping foreign countries commit genocide. And we should really ask how this works. And another point about, that's just a funding point. I wanted to highlight this from yesterday, a small correction. It wasn't really, this was a point I made right at the end when I was briefly going through a lot of tabs that I was just quickly showing you stuff that I was going to get to today. And in that, I accidentally, looking back at it, highlighted this as one of the things from Gaza. And it wasn't really that I was confused about it. I had this up for the Sudan, which we'll talk about later. But I wanted to make sure, just in case somebody was confused by that, I showed this talking about the things that were happening in Gaza. And again, it was really about the fact that I was rattling off the points that I was going to get to today, and this showed the pictures and this and this and this, and I went through it. And so make sure that wasn't confusing for somebody. This was a picture from the Sudan, which we will talk about, which we have already talked about a lot, in fact, and Robert's been covering, but that's how we roll. We're going to, if I make even the smallest mistake and it needs to be corrected, if I'm aware of it, I will correct it. And then just, again, he highlights the important point that Hemedti's genocidal militia continues to massacre Sudanese civilians, which we've already talked about, Hemedti and the whole thing, on a daily basis, yet not one single Western country has applied a single sanction on them. Why? Because he's protected internationally by wealthy UAE sponsors. And the same old narratives go, the Israeli-U.S. support for what they're doing. As long as they back and stand with the right side, we'll ignore all the crimes. So what that really means is you don't really care about the crimes, human rights, or law. You care about your interests. And you use those things as coercive tools to get what you want. But just in case, I'm going to make sure we pointed that out. Now let's start in this conversation about COVID-19 vaccines and the danger around the mRNA platform conversation. Now let's start with a clip from Malhotra speaking with Joe Rogan and recognizing that this is an important statement. What he says is important, but it's also stuff that you've known about because of his work. Malhotra really talking about this a long time ago, but also independent media that's been incessantly highlighting this stuff. It's still shocking to me that some people are still just coming to terms with this reality. So let's start with this clip. And this is him just reiterating this from April 16th, by the way. He says, I repeat.
So in the summer, towards the end of last year, second half of last year, the journal Vaccine, peer-reviewed, this is like the highest impact medical journal for vaccines, right? They published a reanalysis of Pfizer and Moderna's original double-blinded randomized control trials. So this is the level, the highest quality level of evidence. Okay, with all the caveats, drug industry sponsored, all that stuff, right? But still what we call the highest quality level of evidence. Done by independent researchers. Joseph Freeman from Louisiana, he's an ER doctor, clinical data scientist. Associate editor of the BMJ, Peter Doshi. Robert Kaplan from Stanford, right? Some very eminent, in terms eminence of integrity, right? I'm not for eminence-based medicine, but I'm for people who have eminence of integrity, right? They published this reanalysis. And what they found was this. In the trials that led to the approval by the regulators, we'll get onto regulators in a minute, around the world, you were more likely to suffer a serious adverse event from taking the vaccine, hospitalization, disability, life-changing event, than you were to be hospitalized with COVID. So what that means is it's highly likely this vaccine, mRNA vaccine, should never have been approved for a single human in the first place. And that rate of serious adverse events, Joe, is 1 in 800. And it's at least 1 in 800 because that just covers the first 2 months of the trial. In general, what happens is drug companies design trials where they choose people who are less likely to get side effects, so they're generally healthier. Right? And then because it's the first 2 months and I found a mechanism of harm with accelerated heart disease, like my dad died 6 months after 2 doses of the vaccine. And we have autopsy studies now showing that's what's happened. That can happen several months after. It beggars belief. And that, I publish this information and then there's been an evolution. So the question now, I think people, what we want to do, like we talk about statins, right? Same sort of thing, same sort of concept. What is your individual benefit in absolute terms?
This is all stuff that we've talked about, right? I mean, it's very important to see how clear this has been. And this is what's so important is all these, I see these tweets all circulating and people that are like somehow just waking up to this or acting like it's a new story. How did you know they were dangerous when they first came out? Because we read the science, because we looked at it, not just blindly trusting what it said, looking at all of it. And you realize then if trusting the science meant blindly ignoring everything except the ones that went in your direction, pretending that's what that we were doing. No, we looked at the trial data. We looked at all the peer-reviewed evidence, including the things that were saying the opposite. And the body was clear from the beginning. Or the idea that what he's highlighting is like, and this is one that I'll show right here. This is one that we've highlighted many times. And this is about the second, this is what he's talking about, in fact. And this was at least one of the times this happened. The serious adverse events of special interest following these injections in randomized trials, the point is there was a secondary analysis of the phase 3 randomized trials. And this is exactly the point he's making, that they are still associated with excess risk of, it's in here somewhere, that 1 in 800 is what they break this down as. But the point was the excess risk of serious adverse events found in your study points to the need for a formal health benefit analysis. In other words, to say we need to reevaluate how safe these are because they're killing people. And it's obvious. This is the data that is unbelievably clear. It's about the Pfizer part of it in here that was obvious. Where was it? Yeah, there it is. So basically the point that I've made in the past, and this is where you get that number from, the Pfizer trial exhibited, the trial, this is their phase 3 data, 36% higher risk of serious adverse events between the vaccine group and people that didn't take it. So you have a 36% higher chance of getting hospitalization, death, or permanent disability if you took the injection versus not taking it. That's what they're talking about. So I'll include this as well. I know we've talked about all of this many times, but so just interesting to hear this very clear reality that people are still grappling with. And as we just highlighted, Dr. Tess Lowry points to the Telegraph, where they're engaging with, that's going, COVID vaccines could be partly to blame for the rise in excess death that we all know it's explicitly related to. The reason I point that out is because here's another one. Aussie 17 points to the Herald Sun. This is from yesterday. Australia's highest circulation newspaper reports COVID vaccines have a link to global mortality spike. Yeah, because they have an obvious connection to it. Statistically speaking, it's undeniable. Of course, it's always possible it's something else that behind the anomalies, but clearly any investigative journalist, any reporter, any detective, it's undeniable that the overwhelming, perfectly aligned increase in mortality, excess death, and so on, and every other problem is perfectly aligned with the increase of these injections. But here, more and more, we're seeing even the corporate media go, well, maybe there's a link there. Yeah, it's clear. This is about release valve trying to bury this in just a maybe small kind of thing, like the super, super, super rare myocarditis risk that we now know is not so super rare at all. That's how they start this every time. But here's the point we're going to talk about in one angle of this, just so we know very clearly these things are hurting people in 1,000 different ways, and that's not hyperbole. Robin Bernardi highlights the Telegraph, the same Telegraph that's going, ooh, maybe there's a link, now saying this on the other side of it. Lockdown was meant to save lives, but instead put the future of mankind at risk. Oh, the lockdowns did, huh? The lockdowns are the reason your fertility and reproductivity are down? The lockdowns? That's what they're saying. He says, hiding in plain sight, how mRNA COVID vaccines were designed to reduce fertility. Now, you can disagree with the fact that they were designed that way. Frankly, I think there's more accurate than anything else. It's an opinion. Even though I do think that there's a lot of evidence, not proof, but evidence that points in the direction like any investigator would actually be doing, pointing to where the evidence leads, that this was deliberate. I even would argue from like a mathematical perspective, I find it near impossible that you could accidentally make this many mistakes that err on the side of maximum harm. I just think that's impossible, personally. So I agree. I think that at some level, this was partly design or experiment or, disregard for any of the possible side effects in the interest of an experiment, however you want to look at it. So let's look at this actual study. Thank you for Nadi for linking it. Oh, and they removed the link. I swear, it's so strange. I have it right here. It's so strange to me how it seems like it's almost in line with right when I go live, and all of a sudden the highlighter, which you guys don't need to waste time in hearing that, just deletes itself. It's so strange. In any case, somebody recommended this to me, which I now do. I take screenshots every time, which seems like a redundant waste of time, which it drives me crazy. But here's what it says. This week, now that I see where it is, we can just look at it right here. It says, this week, what they're highlighting is this weird story about, in 2022, the scientists discovered some strange thing, which, by the way, that in and of itself should be interrogated, where they claim that there was some random thing where people became allergic to their orgasms, which caused them to have some kind of a decline. And something does not sound right about that to me. But in any case, 2022, right at the peak of their genetic manipulations. But that's another topic. It's related. And they just make this point to go, look, that's what was going on over here. This week, however, as how it starts, scientists discovered something that sounds even more alarming than being allergic to orgasms. I don't believe that. But it says, since the start of the pandemic, they found the quality of our sperm has plummeted. All these weird and different and unique angles of decreased reproductivity and decreased fertility. And it's all baffling, isn't it? Only to people being willfully ignorant about what we're seeing. He goes on to say, to be specific, it's motility, meaning the way it moves. This is the ability, and what it actually specifically means is capable of motion, relating to or characterized by responses that involve muscular rather than audiovisual senses. So the way it can move around. It says that is the ability of individual sperm to swim has declined by an astonishing 22%. Just so happens to be perfectly aligned with the injections that were given. But what could be the reason, they ask, for this precipitous and unexpected fall? What do you think they're going to say? Well, here's the scientist leading theory. I'm curious to see if they've asked all scientists or they just frame the scientists as the couple they asked who are very pro-vaccine, right? But it says a combination of lockdown and working from home. Okay, so lockdowns and working from home have caused your sperm to stop swimming. I'd love to hear the logic on that. Well, it's stupid as you might expect. It says there's Professor Alan Pacey from University of Manchester said, quote, there's not really a lot of evidence that the virus affects sperm. So we thought about what else have changed it and time and course. Everybody's sitting at home, not going to work, probably doing less exercise. And there we go. Bing, bang, boom. It must be that. Very scientific. Or the thing that directly affects your fertility, not just a shot in the dark though, but I'm not a scientist, you know? I mean, it's infuriating how stupid this is. Of course, you could argue these things have a part effect to that, but to pretend like we're just going to go, well, this is the two things that happened during that time and ignore everything else and go, yeah, it must be lockdowns and just laziness. You mean like there's never been a time where we can align those same possible the circumstances in the world that people haven't been locked down or been not working from? I mean, come on, it's childishly stupid. They know that, guys. I'm telling you, there's no way that they're not going, what about the injection that we all know has been reported to have fertility problems? And that's not just a conspiracy theory, guys. So let's point that out. Well, first of all, here's many different times, just two of them, but we've covered it many times. 2021, May 30th, infertility risks of COVID-19 injections. This is not some hyperbolic discussion. This is citing peer-reviewed science and, which I'll show you, their own documents. But these scientists are baffled. Here, Dr. Hodgkinson interview, COVID-19 vaccines, infertility, and spike protein dangers. It's a good interview. I interviewed him back on, I think it was Taylor. I think I interviewed him as well, but May 2021. And here's Dr. Peter McCullough, February 2023. Women have been told they are crazy for 2 years. Now, the EVA project data comes out, which shows you 78% have menstruation impacted by the COVID injection. Concerning are the clotting and bleeding and fertility risks. Right. Well, I mean, you could read this as one of many, many different peer-reviewed studies that you can find talking about this. Doctor's Appeal, and I don't know how to pronounce that, but this is the Doctor's Appeal account, highlights the number of births in Sweden has now been at a record low for 24 consecutive months. What does that align with? What do you think? An exact correlation with the potential impact of the COVID-19 injections on fertility. The statistics for 2023 are now complete and show the lowest birth rate in Sweden's history. But we're baffled, guys. It's just like they're baffled over there, and they're not even dealing with the same topic. But weirdly, they both lead to the same outcome. Gee, we're baffled. Every month for more than 1.5 years when, I think you get the point. I mean, it's almost like it's wasting your time. I think it's obvious what's happening here. And I'm not saying we should ignore other overlapping possibilities, but to pretend like this is not the key culprit, and we're just getting into this, right? I mean, I could make an entire 2-hour show about the data around this one topic. Here's Brett F. Levy. Peer-reviewed science detects vaccine mRNA in the milk of lactating moms shortly after the injection. Raises concerns about babies' exposure to the mRNA via breastfeeding. So now you can overlap this with not just the fact that it's, flooding through their body, which will affect the overall fertility, reproductivity, but then even the idea of neonatal death or infant mortality and, or sudden infant death syndrome and all these catch-all terms they just use to hide vaccine side effects. Here is an important kind of overview. High birth rates plunge in heavily vaccinated countries. And it's all data taken directly from government databases. It's impossible to ignore the overlap, the correlation. It's exactly what you're looking at. Here is directly from Comirnaty. This is Pfizer's distribution specifically, as you can see, BNT 162. So this is the general, like remember it became BNT 162, BNT 162B2, and then there was the other one, right? Those, and so BNT 162 is kind of like the main base for them, and then they ended up making two from that. So my point is, in any sense of these, Comirnaty or any of the variations therein, what they showed you, and this is from, what was it? Let me just do this real quick so I don't have to scroll up. Oh, dang it. Damn it. Hold on. So now I don't have to scroll up. I just accidentally refreshed it for the podcast. So here we are. And this was, I believe, 2021. It's really irrelevant, the time necessarily, but I'm just trying to find a date on it real quick. Well, I believe this is 2021. But either way, it's early in the conversation. They're putting this out in regard to the pharmacokinetic testing. Here's what we're going to show you. I know where it is. Remember this? This is about the total lipid concentration. This is their own study. This is before it was mass given to people in the world. And what they find, specifically your ovaries, women, have one of the highest concentrations. So if we're told that this stays in your shoulder muscle, and this is while they were making that claim, their own data proved that was wrong, because look at all these overlaps, because lipid nanoparticles were the thing that encapsulated the instructions to make spike protein. So this stuff ended up all over your body, which is why we find spike protein, mRNA, and the rest of it everywhere in the body in these people that are autopsied. But 12.3, that's the concentration after 48 hours in the ovaries. The other highest one was, I believe, which one was it? The spleen, 23.4. But point is, though, you can prove, and as Dr. Bhakti tells you, that's in his opinion, the most dangerous part, that's in your ovaries. One of the highest concentrations, same for men. And on that point, here is the pregnancy index from the mRNA for Moderna conversation. And we've shown you this many times. I've found this to be one of the most baffling, not to use their word against them, because of how obvious this is. But really, I shouldn't even use baffling. It's just dishonest. They hid this from people because they didn't like what it showed. What it says is they administered this experimental shot to rats, and it was associated with effects that were, thin fur cover, swollen hind limbs, limited usage of the hind limb. But it says there were no related effects on female fertility. They say that right there. But let me show you something. Embryo, fetal, and postnatal survival, growth and development. They said no effects. But it says the mRNA 1273, that's the main one they're giving, was limited to, we're limited to an increase the number of fetuses with common skeletal variations of one or rib nodes and one or more wavy ribs. So you're having immediate outcomes on the way their skeletons formed. But this is the point that stood out to me the most. It says, trying to cut to the chase, however, such a risk considered low in humans, given the non-live, it says the overall pregnancy index, this is the point, was numerically lower in those that got the injection versus those that did not. So what you're looking at is it's saying that you have a pregnancy index, a general overview percentage of whether, I don't know if it exactly translates to like how successful a pregnancy would be. It's an index about, whether there's an effect on pregnancy, right? And it says the numerically lower index for those that took the mRNA 1273 was 84.1% female rats compared to those that didn't get it, 93.2. You're talking about almost a 10% decrease in pregnancy index. But they go, well, because that's within the range of 75% or lower, we just don't make it a big deal. I would argue, as I did the entire time, that women probably care about a 10% reduction in pregnancy index, especially if they might already have issues. But you didn't tell them this. You hid this from them. And then stressed that pregnant women should take it no matter what. Because you guys are monsters. Here is just the basic Comirnaty risk assessment sheet we've shown many times, which showed you the safety of the vaccine for pregnant people is not known because they weren't included in the studies, which usually is the case. The point is that they didn't know. They pushed it on pregnant women, knowing a decrease in pregnancy index, knowing all the other much bigger and serious problems, and didn't even study to find out. Like every other thing we talk about. Or we can highlight how Scotland just ignored the obvious and gigantic problem of newborns dying. Neonatal death, even all the different angles of this, and what they say. Remember, this is when BBC highlighted it, 2021, investigations into spike in newborn deaths. Well, what'd they do? They came out and said, well, we know it's safe, so we're not even going to look. And, vaccine hesitancy. Yes, I'm paraphrasing, but that is exactly what the actual outcome was. We're not going to look because vaccine hesitancy and because we know it's already safe, despite the fact that there's an obvious anomaly in the spike. I mean, this is disgusting. This was a massive cover-up, and it's still happening, by the way. How about the effects of just nanoparticles by themselves? Here's 2018. I made a big point about this right in the beginning. Potential adverse effects of just nanoparticles, not nanotechnology. I mean, there is an overlap, but just nanoparticles. And what are one of them? Well, lipid nanoparticles, which is one of the things that are discussed in this. And yes, they have a clear, provable effect on reproductivity, according to NIH and plenty of other studies. Okay, how about the idea of glyphosate? Right, so we're not even talking about vaccines anymore. How about just other things that we're baffled, right? So we're baffled about what could have caused this drop in reproductivity. So we'll just pretend it was lockdowns and laziness. Meanwhile, there's glyphosate everywhere in the clothes you're wearing, in the air you're breathing, in the food you're eating, but that can't be it, right? Well, the study says it can, but they're baffled still because the scientists are unaware of all of this science. Probably not. Here's just about herbicides. This is from Pursuit. This is from 2000. Where was it? I looked at it earlier. Where'd that go? I don't know why these are so difficult to find sometimes, or why some places just don't include it. But in any case, the point is, it's not about the date. It's simply showing you safe, in quotes, herbicide in Australian water affects male fertility. But we're baffled still. We're only going to point at lockdowns and laziness, even though we've got all of these very clear overlaps to fertility. 2006, pesticides. Herbicides, pesticides, exposure to the hormonal function of the female reproductive system disrupted? The answer is yes. Or how about just PFAS? We've already shown you this, exposure to PFAS, which suddenly aware of, even though they've been concealing this reality for decades. Well, guess what? It can reduce women's fertility by 40%. But over here, we're baffled, right? Clearly you can show PFAS in children's toys and things you're putting on your body. It's everywhere. And yet they're only like lockdowns, laziness. That's all we can conclude. We're great scientists. They should be embarrassed. It's clearly about politics, guys. Or how about this clip? Remember this? This is about the trans overlap with the puberty blockers, which, what did they do? They caused infertility.
Unbelievable.
And the other issue that's a showstopper now for many parents around giving consent to puberty blockers is the fertility issue. That if the child goes straight from puberty blockers directly to cross-sex hormones, they, at this point in history, are pretty much forfeiting their fertility.
Oh, well, that's okay, though, because, they can make their own choices when they're 12, right? I mean, this is and of course, now we've already highlighted that they've all rolled this back, at least publicly, and saying, well, they're dangerous. We can't give them now. Yeah, that's what we were saying 3 years ago. Glad you're now paying attention, even though you've already pushed this on half the population of the world. I mean, that's an overzealous point, but or rather a hyperbolic point. I don't believe it's half, but my point is they push this on a lot of people who can never take that back. And yet we're still pointing to lockdowns and laziness. Great work, scientists, or really just the ones lying about it. Here's Chief Nerd highlighting other angles of the danger around these injections. Doctors across the U.S. are reporting an alarming health trend in the wake of COVID pandemic. Since about 2021, they've been noticing a rare and unusual cancers in patients who shouldn't fit the bill. Many of them young, without family history of disease. And you know what? We're baffled, guys. We're baffled. Same point. Rare and unusual. You know how many times, just do a quick search for, anything. Turbo cancers, rare cancers. It's exploded perfectly in line with the injections being given. And just the one thing I'll include, since you already know this, is a great breakdown from Swiss Policy Research. COVID vaccines of cancer. The main point being, it's been shown that up to 50% of people that took the injection can induce a temporary immune suppression, known as immune dysregulation or lymphocytopenia, which then causes, if you have an issue or even without it, an explosion of the very thing that causes cancers. And it is very easy to see, but we're baffled. Here's Ozzy17 highlighting another angle of this, which is very easy to prove as well. A lot of great and highly respected doctors and scientists have proven this already. That's why this one is not necessarily the peer-reviewed science. It's just a continuation of the very provable reality. This is just another angle of this. An individual, and the doctor, I believe, is this doctor here, David J. Speicher, PhD. This is his research around the very same point. right? Just showing you that it's now independently shown. It's proven by studies. Kevin McKernan has been one of the ones that really broke this down early. It's everywhere. We've talked about the DNA contamination. We've talked about the protein folding. We've talked about the truncated spike proteins. I mean, my God, sounds like a pretty deliberate problem, doesn't it? And guess what? They're not stopping. They're making more, including for bird flu. Now, DNA contamination confirmed in Australian Pfizer and Moderna vials. It says they've over 350 times above the dose limit set by the TGA. It's pretty consistent, as I understand it, including with the U.S. work. This is where we are. Most of you already know this. It's not news to you guys. The problem is that this is still being done. It's like a point I made about Israel in the beginning. It's all been it's not even just the narrative versus what they're saying or what independent media versus what the mainstream is saying. This is the study, the science that is out there, peer-reviewed, leading science across the board on damn near every claim that they called conspiracy theory, most of which have been edited by the very people screaming that it was conspiracy theory. Myocarditis, blood clots, heart attacks, all of it. Super, super rare. They're still pretending that's the case, even though you can prove it's not. 1 in 800 serious adverse events. And the data peer-reviewed showing you this was less than the flu to begin with, if it's even there at all. All of this is very easy to prove using the very peer-reviewed science they told you to trust. And yet, they're still doing it. Or the fact that I showed you yesterday, the actual platform itself with a peer-reviewed study was shown to be the problem. At least one of the problems. And that's what concerns me so much about this next topic. And I'll include this article, which there's many that you should check out, but the study, peer-reviewed, finds the mRNA platform itself is driving myocarditis. And don't forget that they literally worked on trying to make a coronavirus create myocarditis and using it infecting rabbits and then making it a self-spreading vaccine in the case of China. This is all verifiable work from Ralph Barrick at North Carolina University of Chapel Hill. I've covered it many times on the show. There's own science, his own curriculum. But getting into this next part, the bird flu discussion. So let's not forget. Now, again, I've said this many times, and I hope it's always there, and you understand that I'm also very on guard about the idea that this could be, my point is the conversation of whether it leaks from a lab or it was created and then accidentally, however you look at it. I'm also very on guard to whether that could be a ploy to hide that it's not even there or any number of overlaps therein. So just because we highlight what they're reporting, it's important to consider that this is not just about saying that's what's happening. It's about reporting that has been put out from within, arguing from within their narrative. There's an important part to that while continuing to stand back and go, maybe it's not there at all. Maybe viruses don't exist. Ask yourself these real questions. They're not invalid. It's not conspiracy theory. There's very important reasons that we should be interrogating that topic. I am still of the mind that I just don't think it's as sound as a lot of people pushing it, saying as it's absolute. I think there are still overlaps and anomalies in there, areas that I don't think have been defined enough for me to say one or the other. That's my personal opinion, and of course I could be wrong. But Josh Walkos highlights this. This article from April 2023 details a significant safety breach involving a lab-created H5N1 influenza virus, and this is what Dr. Peter McCullough was highlighting yesterday, or at least I showed it yesterday, at the University of Wisconsin, Madison's Influence Research Institute in December 2019. It says the incident occurred during an experiment where ferrets were exposed to a highly controversial lab-engineered strain of H5N1, avian influenza virus. The breach involved a researcher in training whose personal air purifier, the hose became detached, potentially exposing them to the virus. Or this is what we're being told anyway. Despite the high-risk nature of the research, efforts were made to downplay the incident, avoid notifying health authorities and oversight bodies, and keep the public from policymakers uninformed. Now, one thing I was responding with somebody about this in the chat, who were saying, do we even know this is real? And the point is, well, and this was specifically about whether viruses were real. And my point is always about, well, we've got the overlap of the conversation. And I know this is even divided within the terrain theory discussion, or the people that endorse or believe in that bacteria is a real part of that. Some disagree. My point is there are some of the leading people in that discussion that argue bacteria is real. And the point being that bacteria have proteins, and proteins, like we talk about the spike protein, can shed and so on. Right. So, or virus-sized transistors, nanotechnology. My point is that call it whatever you want. I think it's irresponsible to ignore what they're working on in these labs. I think it's very easy to prove that they're doing something. So if we argue that's not what it is, well, what then, I think it's to just say it's virus, those don't exist. So ignore it. Well, what are they doing? What's happening in those labs and what are they working on? I think that there is something happening there, which of course may not be the case. I think that's the case. I think that's provable. So the question should be, what is it? If it's not a virus, then they're still making something that is being used to get people sick or to spread. And then you could debate all those different things, but we should be interrogating what they are doing in there, not just going, it's all a fabrication. Ask that, but interrogate. Question everything while considering all possibilities. It says, the article also highlights the history of safety lapses in the same lab, including a 2013 incident where a researcher accidentally pierced their finger with a needle containing an engineered H5N1 virus. So if you believe that these things are there, you could, it seems very easy to point out these things could have been accidentally or deliberately put out in the world a long time ago. It says the earlier incident revealed that the lab did not have the dedicated quarantine facility, contrary to what had been communicated by the NIH. You could also argue that the flu discussion in and of itself is because of something like this. It says this isn't the only place these gain-of-function experiments have been conducted, though. These are the labs that need to be viewed as potential culprits of any claimed bird flu outbreak. As mentioned, he says the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Influenza Research Institute, led by virologist Yoshiro Kawaoka, this lab had been involved in creating H5N1 viruses that gained the ability to spread through the air between ferrets, a model for human influenza transmission, which very well could be what we're talking about. The Erasmus University Medical Center, Rotterdam, Netherlands, led by virologist Ron Fouchier, this lab also created modified H5N1 viruses. Like the fact that we're even pretending this is an acceptable thing, in any case, now or before, because they're still doing this stuff. It's verifiable. They even started it up again with EcoHealth or with Peter Daszak. Now, where that is now, I'm up in the air based on what was just going on with his, being called out and so on, but they did start it up again, and it is still happening, despite what Fauci says. It says the CDC has also conducted gain-of-function experiments on bird flu at the National Center for Infectious Diseases in Atlanta. The USDA Southeast Poultry Research Laboratory in Athens, Georgia, has conducted serial passage research on bird flu, and the emergence of B313 is linked to research conducted with H5N8, N5NX clade 2344, which is there's these different categories of it. Not only that, significant mutations found in recent human cases, such as the things they're claiming, suggest connections to these experiments. So, of course, again, my point is we should be on guard to whether this is breadcrumbs to lead us into the manipulation. Ask yourself that, consider that, but also consider whether this might just be their clumsy and incompetent efforts to make something for their own interest, experiment, and so on. And because we're now paying attention more through the COVID-19 agenda, it's easy to trace back. I'm not sure where I stand. Bookmark this, he says, and remember it when this comes out with the new pandemic. I hope that's not what happens. Here's an article from USA Today showing you lab-created bird flu accident shows lax oversight of risky gain-of-function research. 2019. Oh, excuse me, that's 2023. I thought he said it was 2019, but in any case, it's still happening. The fact that that's even happening in 2000. Oh, okay, that's it. Is, so the article is 2023. They're highlighting a breach from 2019. Now, that in and of itself is a good point. So we're now talking about it. 2019. Maybe that's exactly what this all was, for all we know. I mean, that's the kind of manipulations when they come out way down the line and go, look back at this story. I think there's a reason for that. Now, Dr. Peter McCullough highlights what we just pointed out from Dr. Burke, saying we need to test all the cows with PCR tests. Absurd. He says, does Dr. Burke know the proximal origin of the current bird flu outbreak is a government research lab? Why is she pushing for mass PCR testing of healthy livestock to drive up the false positive case count in animals? Probably. Could it be to force for both veterinary and human H5N1 vaccinations? And he highlights this preprint. Proximal origin of epidemic highly pathogenic avian influenza H5N1. And he's the point he just made, that you can trace this back to these labs if you believe that's the reality. But I think what's important to understand is that this is even the claims of their own, like their, I think it was the SPARS pandemic practice, the exercise. Within that itself, one of the arguments is they're caught for lying about X, Y, and Z or hiding this from the public. In their own exercises, they put those stuff in there. It's obvious this is what's happening, that they're lying about this is my point. You could argue that this in itself is the lie, but I think it's clear that they're working on something. That's why I said that to begin with. So if you can trace this back to whatever they're doing in that lab, I mean, I think this is, and this, by the way, this includes John Leake and Peter McCullough. John Leake is, we've interviewed him with Dr. Peter McCullough, and I think it's important work to consider. Here, I'll actually add that in the link so you guys can have that. Now, here's what Denny Rancourt says about the direction it seems to be going for the bird flu. And realize this could go in this direction for damn near whatever they want using PCR tests. He says they are rolling out another PCR pandemic. The new virus will be found to spread globally by testing sewage, milk, farm animals. The PCR test will be said to detect a specific molecular sequence without ever demonstrating specificity or calibration using a pure standard sample of the computer-inferred molecular fragment. Not to mention demonstrating that the said molecular fragment is uniquely associated with a new pathogen. All development will be performed for profit without any cumbersome independent validations, since professional independence was abolished decades ago. The cure will be patented mRNA vaccines, which will not need to be safe or effective because pandemic. Thus, health and the food supply will be protected. Some sarcasm. I mean, this, guys, it's hard to see that that's where this is going, and it's exactly what they've already done. And on that note, which we've already highlighted for you a while ago, this is what's happening. Penn researchers develop experimental mRNA avian flu vaccine. Right. So as we were just highlighting the other ones they were talking about, not just the new COVID direction or the other bird flu claims that the U.S. government was already, or bird flu injection claims that they were funding, that were the older version, the monovalent. This is an active mRNA direction. So the point is, if they're doing this, it's hard. It's, I mean, near impossible that I think they're going to go with the old one. Just like the other conversation. And it'll be even more interesting if we're not even in some height of a pandemic illusion that we're just at the going, it may happen. So quick, let's use this one without human testing to make sure that we're getting ahead of it. We all know that's a logical thing. That's not logical, but they would see it as a, based on their, constructing of this narrative and the way this should be going forward. We know that's within their possibility. The idea that, well, it's the platform. Just like with the COVID overlap, we just plug in the new thing and we pump it out. We don't need safety testing. We know this is where it goes. The question is whether they want to pull this trigger. Promising preclinical results suggest mRNA vaccine platform could limit the impact of avian flu pandemics. You mean the ones that haven't happened? Remember, we just showed you this, by the way. Actually, I'll include this as well, seeing as how I'm going to point to the other one at the end of this segment, where the WHO from 2011 called the previous one, avian H5N1, a part of a culture of fear. Repeated pandemic health scares caused by a culture of fear. They called this out. They said these were not real. Both pandemics of fear, the exaggerated claims of severe public health threats stem primarily from disease advocacy by influenza experts like Fauci, like Birx. This is the reality. You realize they still point at H5N1, this one, and act like it was a huge pandemic. They're lying, guys. Every part of this. So here's the Nature study, which weirdly enough, not that this matters for the show today, but I'm not able to highlight anything on this page or use the highlighter that I normally, the app I have. That's strange to me. Other Nature articles I can, but not this one. I just think that's strange. So I I wanted to include this because this is the current one from May 23rd. I was able to highlight the preprint, but it's definitely not a preprint anymore. It is peer-reviewed. It is published in Nature, but I wanted to show that first. Development of a nucleoside-modified mRNA vaccine against specifically clade 234.4BH5, highly pathogenic avian influenza virus. Oh, it's highly pathogenic? I think we were just talking about the fact that it's not really hurting anybody. It seems to be spreading. At least that's what we're told anyway. But here's the development of this, and here's some important things that I plucked out of this. Actually, I wanted to search really quick for, let's see, what was it? Into the things we were relate from last time. It was the methylpseudouridine. No, we're not seeing those, and not yet anyway. And this comes into the point was I wanted to look for whether or not they're talking yet about the, N1-methylpseudouridine modification, which that's what the mod RNA is. Let me do that actually. Interesting. So what I argue, because these are the same things. These are shots using modified, that's what that means, nucleoside modified RNA, right? So the fact that they're not discussing that, at least as far as I could tell, see, I mean, it's pretty limited in the study. I mean, because it's just, in their argument, it's already defined, it's already clear, it's already safe and effective. It's not true. That was one of the most problematic aspects because the modified RNA, not organic mRNA, but modified RNA, N1-methylpseudouridine modified RNA, is one of the reasons this continues to spread around the body and stays much, much longer, which is then why these things are all over your body in the autopsy. But my point is they're not even getting into that detail anymore. But it says highly pathogenic avian influenza viruses. They're just highlighting it from H5 clade 234b4 or 4b, excuse me, are circulating at unprecedentedly high levels. Are they? I mean, why do we even take these things at face value? Now, what they're talking about is in wild birds. Well, as far as we could tell, it's just a bunch of hype around what might be happening. Doesn't mean, the point is you individually have the right to be concerned or not about your own interest, not the idea that they need to force something on the population based on the hype of a coming fear, even though we know they've done this more than once already, according to WHO and plenty of others. Or, just looking quickly back at what the endless amount of lies that transpired during the COVID-19 illusion. We have to do this for the safety of everyone. Well, they lied, guys. They lied. We all know that. Even the ones pretending they don't know that, they actually know that because they all stopped taking the shots. But here's what it says. Our laboratory and others previously demonstrated that mRNA lipid nanoparticle, the part that Bhakti told you was super dangerous, vaccines encoding influenza virus HA induce potent immune responses. Same game as always. Well, is it the right immune response? Well, they got the response they wanted. Does that mean it's going to protect you against the thing that's out there, if that's even really there? Well, no, that's not the same thing. But just like Fauci said, we saw a antibody response. As long as we see a large antibody response, we can deduce that will have the effect. Well, guess what? They've deduced wrong or lied to you about every other one throughout the COVID illusion. But it says we recently developed a multivalent mRNA lipid nanoparticle vaccine that encodes an HA protein from every influenza virus subtype, including clade 1H5. So they're talking about the bird flu overlap and just every possible influenza virus subtype. Does that sound safe? The multivalent vaccine protects experimentally infected animals against severe disease and death. So we're still playing that game too. Is it about stopping you from getting sick? Oh, no. That's old stuff. We only protect you from severe disease and death. So when you get really sick, we just go, we didn't die. Is that what we're supposed to be protecting ourselves from? And that means that you can still catch it, spread it, and on. It's the same thing during COVID. We're just shifting the goalpost at this point. So now the only thing you get vaccinated for is to maybe not die? Is that the game we're playing? I mean, that's how they keep framing all this stuff. But first is the multivalent. They have one. It's not the one that we're talking about necessarily, but they're highlighting first that they have a multivalent one that protects against all of them. So how long until they just insert that as the necessity because the first one's not working if this happens? But it says, however, the vaccine is not expected to elicit neutralizing antibodies and sterilizing immunity against mismatched influenza virus strains, such as clade 2, 3, 4, 4BH5 vaccine viruses, which, by the way, is the one they're telling you is happening. So why did we even talk about, why did they even talk about this? To basically highlight the fact, oh, don't worry, though, we created a monovalent nucleoside modified mRNA lipid nanoparticle vaccine encoding specifically this one. So all they're saying up here is we make this multivalent one that includes all the different things, but, it might not work. Okay, so we made this extra one that has just this one in it. I just think that's strange. Why, and overall for something that's clearly not even happening right now, in the sense that they're like, if this was something that was necessary, you wouldn't see the hype around. Let's put it this way to make it as simple as possible. You're seeing it spread from whatever they claim anyway, question that, birds to cows to occasional people, they claim, which for all we know is a PCR false positive or just some other random flu or nothing at all. And then nothing happens. They're around people. They're going about they're not spreading this to other people. I don't believe this went from cows to chickens to people with nothing else happening. I think that's a ridiculous claim. Certainly possible, I guess. But then my point is they're rushing through all these multivalent specifics for something that's not actually a problem right now. That seems alarming to me. They don't just spend money for no reason if they aren't going to use it. Like we talked about Finland already saying they're going to start to give it out to people, specific groupings around the most concerning. And we talked about the risks that are associated with the shot they're pointing to, which are a hell of a lot higher than the thing that you might be dealing with here, according to their own statistics. But it says we vaccinated ferrets using a prime boost strategy to mimic the dosing schedule initially used for COVID-19. SARS-CoV-2, mRNA vaccination of humans. You know what that means? We don't just give you one shot. We don't even make it to be one shot. We give you one and then we boost you later. That's the right thing to do. They modeled it after COVID-19. Did that work? I mean, it spectacularly failed, even according to Fauci. So we just do it again? Does that seem like an appropriate step? It's kind of boggling. It's mind-blowing that they just don't care that we see this, that most everybody was, at least at the end of that, kind of concerned about what the new shot. I mean, they stopped taking them. And they just go in the exact same direction, the same nucleoside modified mRNA lipid nanoparticle shot with boosting, primed and boosting. And I mean, it's laughable. It will also be important, they say, to evaluate the clade 234B4B H5 mRNA lipid nanoparticle vaccine in birds and other animals that could potentially serve as an intermediate host to humans, such as swine. Of course, the pig aspect, the cow aspect, it's just all over. We're going to just jam this stuff full of every animal possible. Seems like a really dangerous and stupid thing to do. Our studies highlight the flexibility, they say, of the mRNA vaccine platform, which is the whole point, which allows for rapid development and precise antigenic matching of vaccine immunogens to emerging influenza virus strains with pandemic potential, or not at all, as the entire COVID illusion proved. They failed and failed and failed and failed and lied and failed and lied and then covered it up and lied and then failed over and over and over. Is anybody confused about that? The reality of how clearly they would push the new, we have to aim it towards the BA.2.5. What were we showing you? At that time, this is whether, even if you believe those don't exist, the point was they were pointing to the BA.2.5 or whatever it was at the time. And we would look at their data and go, well, according to them, this is now diminishing and new things are rising. And they just rush the thing out 2 months after that and say, this is the next one. And we're already 4 things down the line according to their own narrative. It's like they can't even coordinate. If it's all lies, they can't even coordinate their lies with what they're actually doing. Either way, that showed you that this kind of direction is a failure. Fauci wrote about that. It says the project has been funded in part with federal funds from the NIH, HHS. The same old guys. They're getting the old band back together. Let's go right back at it and do it again, right? The same people. That concerns me. Now, just like we said, we highlighted this one on yesterday's show, the pandemics of fear, right, that caused the precautionary stocking of largely useless antivirals and irrational vaccine policies. The idea that this is because of the industry and the hype and the lies from the media. That's what the WHO is talking about right here. Well, I said I would talk about the other one. Here's the other one. This is from Health and Human Services saying influenza deaths request for correction. Rather, it's somebody engaging with them. It's one of the doctors writing to Health and Human Services. It says, and this is from 2000, I believe this was 2017. It says, the U.S. data on influenza deaths are false and misleading. The CDC acknowledges a difference between flu and flu-associated death, yet uses them interchangeably, just like we're seeing with COVID and anything going forward. It says, why are flu and pneumonia bundled together? A lie, essentially. And here, there's a lot in here you should read. But the point is, meanwhile, according to CDC's National Center for Health Statistics, influenza and pneumonia combined, like PIC, pneumonia, influenza, and COVID, which is the same lie, the same manipulation, they claim pneumonia and influenza together took 62,000 lives in 2001, except 61,777 of them were attributed to pneumonia and 257 to the flu. And after that, only 18 of those 257 were actually positively identified. That is a very real stat, and that's what we're dealing with today. It's blindly lumping it all in whatever direction works for them. And it says the CDC uses indirect modeling methods to estimate the number of deaths. So in other words, they lie to you, or they guess the best they can, but we've already seen how many times they've guessed in the wrong direction that happened to align with the interest of the government. It says, thus, the much publicized figure of 36,000, which is the claim up here that they say that's how many die from the flu every year, is not an estimate of yearly flu deaths, as widely reported in both the lay and scientific press, but an estimate generated by a model of flu-associated death. Isn't that a little bit different? A lot of bit different? And one of their experts says on the record, based on modeling, we think it's associated. He says, I don't know that we would say that it's the underlying cause of death, except that's what the CDC says. And they write, yet the stance is incompatible with the CDC assertion that the flu kills 36,000 people a year. It's a guess based on a model. And it says a misrepresentation that is yet to be publicly corrected. And here's the most important part. At the 2004 National Influenza Vaccine Summit, co-sponsored by the CDC and the American Medical Association, Glenn Nowak, Associate Director for the Communications at the NIP, spoke on using the media to boost demand for the vaccine. One step of a 7-step recipe for generating interest in and demand for flu vaccination, or any other, that's the title, occurs when, quote, medical experts and public health authorities publicly state concern and alarm and predict dire outcomes, that's what it's written right there, and urge influenza vaccination. So in other words, when they hype the fear around something that's not there. Another step entails, quote, continued reports that influenza is causing severe illness and or affecting lots of people, helping foster the perception, that's their words, that many people are susceptible to a bad case of influenza, despite the fact that only 257 people they claim died from it, and yet only 18 of those were even tested. It says, preceding the summit, demand had been low early in the 2003 flu season. It says, quote, at that point, the manufacturers were telling us that they weren't receiving a lot of orders for vaccines for use in November or December, recalled Dr. Nowak on NPR. So he says, quote, it really did look like we needed to do something to encourage people to get a flu shot. So it says, by arbitrarily linking flu with pneumonia, which is where that comes from, current data are statistically biased. Right? So we are at a point where we needed to hype up the fear, so they jam those together and say, look at how bad it is. And they lied to you. It says, until corrected and until unbiased statistics are developed, the chances for sound discussion and public health policy are limited. And here we are today. Never changed. In fact, it got worse. They combine other things too. They lied to you. PCR false positives. That's the game. They're in the business of lying to you to sell vaccines, if not far, far darker things around that. Now, we're going to get into a conversation about Israel, but I wanted to give you a couple of updates. Just one thing we covered yesterday that I highlighted in the beginning of the show today that I wanted to make sure has been followed up on. This was the article we showed you from yesterday. And this is in regard to a Channel 13 from Israel saying Israel was put on a blacklist of the UN of countries that kill children. Now, we reported yesterday, the point was that this was basically because Israeli media is saying it, it very well could be a hype, nonsensical lie for their own agendas coming from the Israeli government that has immediate control over the media. We just saw them literally actually censor with black bars an article Haaretz put out, one of the leading platforms there. So you realize Israel's censors have a direct effect. There's no freedom of press there. That's the reality. If they can do that, there is no freedom of press. So they're lying like everything else. But the point is, I was worried that this might have been something like that. So even though they're reporting it, even though they're showing the breakdown of them saying it, I was still just cautionary. Maybe it's a lie. But here we are today, and it seems to have continued to report. UN decides to put Israel on a blacklist for harming children in conflict zones. And it goes on to just highlight what they were saying. And they're citing now that they're saying Antonio Guterres from the UN has informed the Israeli army's attaché in Washington, Major General Heidi, that the decision was to put them on the blacklist for killing children. Israel's inclusion in the blacklist is very problematic and may cause countries in the world to impose an arms embargo on Israel. Well, we can only hope. I'll include that as well. And then here is Times of Israel from today. UN adds Israel to a list of shame for alleged rights violations against children. This is from Times of Israel. So it's pretty clear this is happening. I think it's absolutely correct. It's the right thing to be. I think this should be happening. And on top of that, apparently, I haven't seen it yet on the UN website, and we've been looking in general. But this is just one of the things that was published from before that shows you that this is not new. It goes back as far as you want to look, from human rights groups, from the UN, Israel's suppression of Palestinian rights and organizations, illegal and unacceptable. Just, they've been highlighting the crimes of Israel for a very long time. So let's talk about Russia and Ukraine before we get back into the conversation of Israel. I want to just start with that so we saw that important point that it has been in many ways verified even by Times of Israel. But I think it's important to consider this overlap. Now, this is about the U.S. government continuing to fund what is clearly the most, well, I mean, I shouldn't say that anymore. What I was going to say is the most clear and the most obvious embodiment of a, Nazi fascist element in the world. But I think Israel's seemingly taking that in stride, like just showing you no problem. That's what they like. I think the point is that we can prove the history there, which since I bring it up, I'll include our work around that we overlap the undeniable connection to the historical, I don't mean neo-Nazis, I mean the actual Nazi party and the organization, the Zionist organization trying to align themselves with Nazi Germany during and after the final solution, which is a verifiable fact. You look it up on Wikipedia, and yet we grapple with the idea that somehow we're fighting that, and they built Israel to defend against the thing they were helping and, at least aligned with. It's ridiculous. But we covered this, Zionism versus Nazism. My point, though, is that we see the Azov movement, the other very shockingly obvious neo-Nazi and actual Nazi elements in Ukraine, that both Israel and the United States continue to fund against Russia. Whatever your thoughts against Russia, the point is that these people are actively continuing to support the worst people out there. That's important to realize. Now, this is coming from yesterday. U.S. to send $225 million military aid package to Ukraine. Americans don't want this. It's across the board. You can see this, guys. The vast majority of Americans do not want to spend more money on forever wars. Whoever their support, it's just not in the car. But their government, whether it's Trump or Biden or RFK, they seem to be all about it. Despite what, I guess you could hope the anomaly would be RFK Jr. that is just saying certain things to get a power and he's going to change and become the anti-war candidate again. But I don't see that happening. Seem to be blindly supporting Israel like the rest of them. But on the note of Ukraine and Russia, it's important to highlight some of these overlaps. Here's what Douglas McGregor highlights, which is concerning as hell, as they're giving more funding, and as this only seems to be kind of building towards something much worse. Possibly my concern is using this in a large event kind of way to distract from what's going on in Gaza. But he says NATO is now planning to get U.S. troops to the front line to fight Russia, which, if you want my honest opinion, it's already happening. They've been on the ground, just like in Gaza, which we've proven 10 times over. So whether this is just more deployment, I think we need to acknowledge that's already been going on. We've seen U.S. personnel on the ground with Ukraine many times, but now they're publicly saying this. And it's not just the U.S., but NATO. So NATO countries, which that would argue it would be at least a public big step, because realize we've seen all sorts of overlap in Ukraine as well, other countries. But he goes, what are they thinking? NATO has disclosed its preparations to deploy American troops to the European front lines in the event of a full-scale conflict with Russia. How is that not already what's happening? It says innovative land corridors are being established to expedite the movement of soldiers. Like, they're driving this, guys. And the point continues to be made. The U.S. government must be aware that they are goose-stepping into destruction. They cannot possibly take all this on at once. And no matter what the hype about the, pretty much the right side of the conversation wants to argue that no one can defeat the U.S., it's just not true. Very clearly, if Israel takes us to the point to where it lists in the Middle East, causing a multi-front regional war, they will not be able to fight this off. It's very clear. No matter what the arguments you're hearing from people in the partisan media, it's obvious. And the U.S. government and military and experts that are being honest about it have openly said that. So why do they keep pushing it? Why do they keep funding Israel? Why do they keep poking Putin in the eye and driving this even further? I don't know. I frankly think it's baffling watching a situation where that they know that, and yet they keep pushing it, maybe in hopes that, maybe they're calling the ultimate bluff to say that they, what's funny when you think about it, that they're playing the role of what they always say Russia is, the belligerent, warmongering. That's what they always say, the old Soviet Union, which is not what they are today. While banking on the fact that Russia will show restraint is what I think is happening, which is interesting when you think about the narratives, right? But in any case, they're still pushing this forward. It says reports suggest that these plans also encompass provisions for potential attacks in Russia. Very worried about the way this goes forward. Daniel McAdams, so while they're pushing to have, at least publicly, U.S. troops on the front line fighting Russia, there's a Ukrainian list we've talked about many times that has many Americans on that list. And they're okay with that. And even worse, as Daniel McAdams points out, he's now made that list. It says the organization's making its hate list of American citizens. Guess what? It's funded by U.S. aid. That's just where we are. Your own government funding lists that put Americans on kill lists, or funding people in Israel that are actively killing both American hostages and American Gaza residents. Still happens. It's happening right now. They're bombing places where they're probably killing them right now. But who cares? Because, we support the worst people on the planet. But it says, shocking to read that my tax dollars, he says, go toward putting me on a list of foreign countries known to assassinate journalists. And make sure I could retweet that. Make sure you follow up. He says he's going to do a write-up on this. Danny McAdams from the Ron Paul report. Or is that what it was? The Ron Paul's show. But if you haven't followed, director of the Ron Paul Institute is his actual title. Danny McAdams, you should be following. I just think that's kind of crazy. And I think that most Americans who are honest with themselves are coming to terms with a lot of these really uncomfortable realities. Arnaud Bertrand writes, those numbers in regard to this survey, which again, I always take surveys or polls with a grain of salt, but it's been pretty consistent in this regard. The numbers are absolutely unbelievable and show how much at odds Western so-called democratic leaders are with their own populations. And again, when it comes to Ukraine, but also Israel. It says it's a survey compiled by the Institute for Global Affairs, part of Eurasia Group, one of the leading American political risk consultancies, meaning that if that's how bad it looks, it's probably way worse than that. An incredible 94%, according to this poll, of Americans and 88% of Western Europeans believe, quote, that NATO member countries should push for a negotiated settlement with the war in Ukraine. And only a tiny minority in both countries, less than 20%, believe that the West should prioritize goals like weakening Russia or restoring the pre-2022 borders of Ukraine, instead vastly favoring goals like avoiding escalation, avoiding direct war between nuclear powers. Yeah, exactly what we're telling you. Whether it's nuanced or not, the Americans don't want to support what they're doing with your money while giving it to the worst people in the world. He says, I always had the distinct feeling that most of the populations in the West were opposed to their government's policies in Ukraine, but he never expected such overwhelming numbers. It says so much about Western, quote, democracy today, and also about the media class, which tells us continuously how important fighting Russia is. Not only do they not represent the voice of the people, but they really don't convince them either. So if they don't represent the voice of the people, whose voice do they represent? The government, special interests. The exact opposite of what journalism is supposed to be. Not new information. You all know this. Another interesting and very related insight is that when asked which of the following are the biggest challenges your country faces today, by far the most popular answer is, quote, political elites making decisions that hurt the public. Look at it. Here's the link. You can look at it for yourself. This is my larger point right now about it's not just one topic or the other. They are rapidly hemorrhaging support from their own people, and that terrifies them. That's the one thing that they're always so desperate to maintain with the two-party illusion, divide and conquer, keeping us at odds with each other, wedge issues and elections and so on. And right now, people are increasingly aware of how completely wholesale dishonest they are. We should have always been like that. And that's not to say that it's the country. It is the government. We have been manipulated, whether it's going back to the overlap of organized crime and that whole overlap that Whitney highlights, or whether it's something from newer today or Zionist influence or all of them combined. We're watching the reality of what that government has become, if it was ever what we thought. But the point is, Americans can change that. I believe that. That's why they're so desperate to frame themselves as the good guy, because they know that's what we want. And Thomas Fauci just highlights the same study, saying an overwhelming majority of Western citizens don't support their proxy war. And even less so, it follows all-out war with Russia. So what are the elites doing? Escalating military support for Ukraine and pushing for World War III in the name of democracy, of course. Sound smart? Well, here's what you're getting from these. People are trying to frame this and really trying to justify the ongoing illegal actions from the U.S. government and everybody else involved. They say, here's how they highlight this. President Putin threatens to use nuclear weapons. Or not at all, in fact. If you actually even read what they highlight in here. And you can watch it. It's in another foreign language, but this is very clearly what he's continually done. He says, the West believes that Russia will never use it. We have a nuclear doctrine. And that's actually, funny enough, my exact point. While pretending that they're the belligerent monster, they're banking on the fact that they have restraint. It's hilariously inverted. It shows you that they are who they're pretending Russia is. And it says, and that's not good guy, bad guy. It's just simply about the facts. It says the West believes that Russia will never use it, he says. But he goes on to say, we have a nuclear doctrine. Look what is written there. If someone's actions threaten our sovereignty and our territorial integrity, we consider it possible to use all the means at our disposal. That is so shockingly far from what Putin says he'll use them. Of course, he's pointing to the doctrine. Should we be pushed to a position where we are facing our annihilation? It says we'll consider using all of our possibilities. You know, Israel and the rest of them, even though they hide that reality, they will say, we'll do any, like the U.S. government repeatedly, but Bolt, Pompeo, Trump will wipe you off like you've never seen before. We'll wipe you off the map. We'll bomb. We'll take action you've never seen. We'll do, that kind of stuff, which very clearly means something that is bigger than what they're already doing, because they are the living embodiment of what they say these people are. The might is right, stomping around, only know one thing. Everything, if you have if you're in, what's the analogy? If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? That's the idea, is they know one thing: violence, blunt force. And they're losing their own support because of it. But here's what the France 24, the guy interviewing, said about this, which I think is just so lacking of awareness. The idea that first of all, that journalists are supposed to pick a side, which is the exact opposite. Now, you could have your own personal opinions, but the idea that you're supposed to declare a side in some kind of moral battle, journalists are supposed to be objective to a fault in everything they cover, whether or not you think that's the reality. And objectivity is not counter to taking the moral side. In fact, the objectivity is what actually helps you find that moral side. Oh, look at that. Instagram censored our show again. I feel like I'll point that out every time it happens now. But here's what he says about this. And then I'll contrast that with what the Azov movement is currently doing, as he highlights what moral side you're supposed to be on, as I guarantee he's backing Israel. Oh, it looks like I didn't grab that. That's frustrating. Hold on. I don't know how I do that. As I grab this. The Azov movement, as we've covered from the start, are doing some of the most, the deliberately violent, deliberately, what's the right word? Designed to belittle and dehumanize, right? Tying into a lamppost, jamming things up their private parts. I mean, that's what they were doing. It's all public, guys. And of course, you've got nothing but the screams from people online acting like that was all fake news. And now it's easily proven. Here is this clip, and France 24 pretending like the moral side is to back the people doing those things.
In a way, caught up in an information war where we can be very easily manipulated, I think, and we have to be aware of that. And we also have to be aware of the need to be objective.
Right. So you'd think he's going in the right direction, except he ends up going, we should be on the side of Ukraine. Well, they have been caught, which I'm sure he's aware of, despite acting like he's the objective journalist, lying more than I've ever seen now, save for Israel. Just one after another, about rape, about the ghost of Kiev, about things they were shooting down, just one after another, just quick succession in the first couple of weeks, getting caught everywhere. And it just continued all the way forward. Bucha, Kramastock train station, they got caught in every one of these things lying about it. The missile, the rocket that apparently flew and hit the other country that they lied. Zelensky never stopped lying about that, despite the entire world saying, no, that was your missile. They're just liars. That's what they do.
But not necessarily neutral. That was what a lot of, there's been a lot of discussion about what does it mean to be aware of the need to be objective, but not necessarily neutral. That was what a lot of, there's been a lot of discussion about what does it mean to be neutral. And I think the conclusion in terms of France 24's guiding principles is that we have to be objective, but we're in a situation where this war that Russia is waging against Ukraine fundamentally is unprovoked. You can debate about the geopolitical background and the reasons why it's happened, but you can't, in my view, in any way say that it's justified. And when you look at some of the crimes that have been committed.
I mean, guys, how can you possibly be a journalist and not consider, like, what he's doing is just blindly accepting the narrative spun around the Donbass, about Crimea, about the fact that they're openly Nazi elements that have been called Nazi elements by probably him and his own paper, before suddenly going, what do you mean Nazis? They're all not there anymore. It's all a big lie. Like, how do you possibly not see that? So this person is either dishonest or really that completely inept at his job. I think these are objective realities, but of course I could be wrong.
By Russian soldiers in Ukraine, the massacres in Bucha. I mean, I've visited also the deoccupied areas of Kharkiv region, in particular.
Remember Bucha? I've proven to you based on that video and many other examples that they were the ones that killed them based on the satellites. They lied about where they were, the fact that they pulled those bodies into place in order to highlight, and then pointed out and said, look what Russia did. Even though you have them on video pulling bodies into exact position where they ended up. But apparently he can't suss that one out.
Stories people tell there about being tortured by the Russian. You can't be neutral in those kinds of circumstances. But you have to also, make sure that we are being clear to our audiences
Of course you can be neutral. Like the idea that he's trying to pretend that you suddenly you're no longer neutral when you feel something is wrong, then you shouldn't be a journalist. Because the point there becomes that you've decided that's wrong. So you're already on a side. So you're no longer objective. That's Western media for you right there. It's not about saying that you accept the wrong thing. You just are objective. You don't apply fault. You look at the facts and you report the facts. It's amazing. I have to explain this to mainstream journalism.
Why we're not neutral, why we think that this is something that we, in a way, have to take sides on.
How embarrassing. Now, by the way, here's that Bucha clip that I played many times in the opening of it. It's just a quick clip montage, but it shows you the same points.
Невероятно храбрые, самые лучшие воины этого мира, военнослужащие украинской армии. Что мы откроем, когда будет деоккупирован Мелитополь, Бердянск, Херсон? Невероятно храбрые, самые лучшие воины этого мира, военнослужащие украинской армии. Что мы откроем, когда будет деоккупирован
Meaning they were trying to de-bomb the bodies or look for bombs in the body. Oh, really? So you're going to stand 10 feet away from a body and drag it around? Like military people laughed at that. They got caught. They were literally dragging these bodies into place and then left them there and then went, look what Russia did. They were caught. They were caught red-handed like everything else. But he doesn't know that or doesn't care. So here is an example of what they're currently doing. And this has been circulating around. I saw Freddie Pontone talk about this as well. Ukrainian soldiers put out in their own video executing African mercenaries for, quote, deserting. And realize the same with Israel, same with Ukraine. They're using their moderate rebels and they're shuffling Azov movement back and forth, but they're also just paying people to fight. And it's not about having, Israelis in other parts of the world coming to fight because they believe in the cause. They're literally paying thousands of dollars for mercenaries in Israel and in Ukraine to fight. Is that what you usually hear from the good guys? Well, the funny thing is even the U.S. government often and usually works with mercenary groups or like Academy, Blackwater, same deal. I argue there's an obvious point there, but either way, the point is this is what the Azov movement is doing, and this is what they're pretending is the moral side. As they say, your black ass should have stayed in Africa. Right, you know why? Because these people are openly, vividly racist. Literally, their statement is, we will spread the white race around the world once we're done with Russia, but we pretend, it's not real. We don't want to hear it. Because they're the bad guy. Anyone will listen to them. They're saying, that's what we're going to do. They have conferences in the beginning of this saying, the U.S. media is lying about us. We do believe in this. We are Nazis. Open. Of course, you get CNN accidentally catching them giving Nazi salutes and having ISIS patches, but we just pretend it's not all there. How embarrassing. Here's this clip. You can just see it right here. It says, we have no mercy for deserters. And they shoot them down. I mean, it's not unique. Azov movement's putting out, remember right in the beginning, they put out let's see if I can even grab that. It's been a while. Yeah, look at that. This is from the Azov movement. Here's the actual link. Oh, no, that's right. I forgot. Twitter deleted it. Let's see if I can grab it this way. Of course they delete it because they're covering up just like everything else. Even though this wasn't a violation of anything, not really. I mean, they're allowing pictures of dead bodies everywhere. But this was an image of an Azov movement member dipping their bullets in pig fat. Oh, come on. I brought that up last time. See, the Wayback Machine and the rest of these are compromised, in my opinion, too. But here's the article that had the video. And I've got the video somewhere. I just don't have it pulled up right now. But these were Azov movement fighters that were dipping their bullets in pig fat and because they were about to fight Muslims. That's the kind of people they are. Because this is, it's about violating their religion while you kill them indiscriminately, because that's just what good people do. And it says, Azov fighters, the National Guard, greased the bullets with lard against the orcs. Just another one of their derogatory terms. So as they assassinate these people, they're willing to use them, throw them at bail, but then they want to stop fighting for you, we'll kill them. Even though they're mercenaries. Make a lot of sense? That's who these people are. And don't forget, Israel has openly been funding the Azov movement specifically for a long time. This is 2018. Rights groups in Israel were asking, why are you arming neo-Nazis? And it's specifically the Azov movement, if you haven't already seen this, which is right here. Or where was it? Right there. Azov militia. So if you're confused about the Zionist movement aligning itself with Nazi Germany, then you should also probably be confused about why they're funding neo-Nazis in Ukraine. But once you understand that that's what they've always been doing, it's not hard to see. And here is another horrifying example of Ukraine launching an incomprehensible attack against civilians, specifically in Lugansk, in the area. This is the Donbass overlap, which they've been doing long before Russia began this. And again, just the actual war with them, but it says at least 35 people killed. This is the reality of what they're continuing to do. And here's an example of Azov movement members from Ukraine fighting with Israel in Gaza, which is not a new topic, just showing you the overlap, guys. And that's not a new thing. We've already covered this going back to 2023, where he writes on the board, "Hey, Mom, I'm in Israel. Azov movement. Yay." Right? I mean, this is an undeniable thing, guys. Here is Israel's use of thousands of foreign mercenaries in their attacks on Gaza. And you can read this for yourself. Thousands of dollars being spent on mercenaries. You could read into that however you want, because they can't fight it themselves, because they don't have enough people to want to, because their own military isn't even a real military. They've been spending decades shooting women and children, and they're seemingly proving that right now with the fact that they can't even, just everything about this. Now let's talk about the ceasefire overlap, showing you what we're really dealing with, what these governments truly are, who they're supporting at your expense, pretending they're doing it for you. They're pretending this whole ceasefire engagement is confusing, when it's one of the most obvious things in all of this, that Israel is desperately maintaining this. You could argue just Netanyahu, but I don't think that's the case. I think that's the framing to make it look like it's only one person. But I do know Netanyahu is explicitly invested in doing this to maintain his own, not going to jail, but it's bigger than just him. The point is that they've offered this, and it's been accepted more than once, and more than once they've pretended it didn't happen. Robert wrote about this in May. Hamas agrees to ceasefire. Israel attacks Rafah in response, the one we just covered recently. Israel once again refuses their own ceasefire deal after Hamas accepts. So you can read those for yourself. I'm not going to go to all the details, seeing as how we've talked about it a lot. Oh, excuse me. This was my show about it. Hold on. I wanted to grab the article. I meant to grab the article, not my show on it. Oh, well. Well, it's in there. It's in there somewhere. I don't have time to waste to search for it. But the point is, Robert covered this as well. And they are absolutely doing the same exact thing. Now, to talk about this, we briefly brushed over this yesterday, but this is from the 6th. It's simply saying Hamas claims disparity between Israeli and U.S. ceasefire proposals. So now we're hearing that there might actually be a level of them going, here's the thing we want to show you, and here's the thing we're pretending we're agreeing to. So that could be a Biden thing or a U.S. thing, or it could be an Israeli plan to guarantee that this will break down if they really want to, by going, we're not even on the same page at the end of the day. When understand, this is the point you cannot ignore, Israel accepted this, they gave it through the U.S. mediators and their own, and then everybody said, Israel is okay. They better take it. Hamas is the only one. Across the board on Twitter. And then Hamas, and this is the sequence of events, said, we accept. And then Israel spun out and was like, wait, lies. That's not true. That's the wrong thing. We don't agree. You already did. So even if that is true, it's too late. You already said yes, but now they just reeled it back and embarrassed themselves, but they don't care. So here's what Suppressed News highlights. This is a statement from one of the Hamas leaders I was saying earlier. His name is Osama Hamdan, not the three being comfortably set up in Qatar. He says the ceasefire agreement in Gaza proposed by the U.S. president are merely words, and the movement has not received any written commitments. So that's very interesting to me. So, and I guess the point would be that first this becomes a statement saying, here's what Israel's offering. Do you accept? They say yes. And then that becomes some kind of a written agreement, I would imagine. So the point is, I think that kind of makes sense, because now we're at a point where Israel's already pulled back, and so there's nothing to be signed anyway. The point is that they don't have anything in front of them to say, here's the outline. It says Hamas is ready to accept any agreement that meets the movement's basic demands, which has never changed since the first week, which include a ceasefire and a complete withdrawal of their forces, which, by the way, are the only things Israel won't agree to, which means they only care about that and not their own people. Because realistically, they could say, okay, we'll pull out, ceasefire, everybody comes home. And then 30 seconds after that, go right back to bombing them. And you damn well know that. They haven't honored any of these agreements going back as far as you can look. So why don't they do that? Because one, I'm convinced that they don't want these people to come back for multiple reasons, because of what they know from October 7th, what they know about what's happening now, on and on and on. On top of that, they care more about going after all of Palestine for Zionist interests than they do about the Israelis that are there. Simple. It's very simple. Now, here is Middle East Eye highlighting the full text of Israel's Gaza ceasefire proposal that at this point is probably 45 times different because of how many times they've already muddled this up. But at the time when they offered and it was accepted, this was the breakdown. And this was published on yesterday, on the 6th. Now, it says the first part of this, under the first stage, there's 3 or 4 stages, I think. It says the temporary secession. Now, here's what I think is interesting. Biden put out some little image that it doesn't seem to correspond with anything in reality that says permanent and lasting ceasefire. That's clearly not the case. Temporary cessation of operations, step 1. Temporary cessation of aerial movement, that's step 2. Temporary seems very clear, but you could argue that it goes on to make our state how they would then progress to a longer lasting one, right? But this is what Orwell highlighted in general. If you read all of these, and you can go through each one, I think it's kind of, until something's actually truly happening, it's kind of a thing of a waste of time. But it says all procedures in this stage above this, including the temporary cessation of military operations by both sides, aid and shelter effort, withdrawal of forces, etc., will continue into stage 2 so long as the negotiations on the conditions for implementing stage 2 of the agreement are ongoing. That seems wildly ambiguous, and it simply says this is temporary in the first place. And then we have to segue into the stage 2, which apparently there's an opening there for them to go, no, this didn't happen, which is what's going to happen. It says the guarantors of this agreement shall make every effort to ensure that those indirect negotiations continue until both sides are able to reach agreement on the conditions for implementing stage 2, which I guarantee that's where that will break down by design. So overall, it seems to be designed to not lead to the end game, which is the whole point. They don't want this. All they would have to do is set out the basic agreements that they both have. And I mean, if Israel actually means what they keep saying, then this would already be done, because both of them are basically saying the same things other than the ongoing effort to destroy Hamas, which again is not boxed out of this conversation once this is settled. You think they can't just violate the piece of paper they wrote down by saying, which by the way is what's happened every time a rocket just flew, so they broke it. It's on them. We're going to kill everybody again. It's very simple. Now, Sam Husseini, highlighting the reality of this, highlights Rudiger Distral saying, Russia, China wrangle with U.S. over UN resolution on Gaza ceasefire plan. The U.S. is dead in the UN is dead in the waters. It says the United Nations Security Council has become a proxy battlefield on the major powers and serves no one, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with. I don't believe any of I feel most of these people in there are actively, and specifically the Security Council, actively fighting for their own interests. But I don't think it's as simple as one thing or the other. That would be like talking about the UN body, like the actual people in the UN, not the Security Council, because each one of these are different countries with their own interests. So I think it's dangerous to broad stroke something like that, especially as we've seen many different anomalies like Bolivia, and plenty of other examples where they challenge them right in that chamber. But it says the West must decouple from this useless which I agree with. I think the UN poses a very concerning risk for sovereignty in a lot of different ways. But that does not mean we should not acknowledge and understand and align ourselves with the agreed upon international law dynamic, which doesn't mean they can then use that to invade. That's not the point, but it's about acknowledging that there is an agreement of what we say is crossing a line, and that we can all as a collective say that group just broke that rule. Doesn't mean that they're being dragged off the jail, but it sets a standard that can then be enforced by other entities however they see fit. And that's not to say that there's I guarantee you somebody can come up with a better solution. But at the moment, while we have the people that are acting like international law is everything that matters, are the ones that are actively using that against everybody, and in fact violating it everywhere they turn. So there has to be some kind of an overall, framework. The problem is that right now they seem to be driving in the direction of bucking the entire thing, ignoring that the only ones actually violating are the ones pretending like they're corrupt, even though we know ultimately in a lot of clear ways that they are. But my point is, if you have a multifaceted body of individual countries and individual people, that, let's just even say they're all corrupt. The point is that their corruption will not align. They will all be acting in their own interest. There is a level of accountability that happens within something like that. But even then, I still don't argue they're all corrupt. But here is what Sam Husseini said. It's not a ceasefire proposal. It's a stop the ICJ orders from being implemented resolution. 100%. This is what the U.S. government means when it says it wants a rules-based order and not a law-based order. It sets the rules. It shreds the law when it wants. Exactly. Now, he also highlights what Francis Boyle said. We're first highlighting this from Rami Ayari. This is the United States mission to the UN, circulated a draft ceasefire resolution, and this is posted on the 3rd, that welcomes the new deal announced the 31st and calls upon Hamas to accept it. And we already went over this. How can you have something like that posted and then pretend that Israel didn't accept? And you put all these statements out and everybody tweets about it. And we go, Hamas better take it. And they say yes. And then you act like it's not the case. How embarrassing for everybody. Like, this is really weak. But he highlights Professor Francis Boyle, on the draft UN resolution. He says, this is a joke. It calls upon Hamas to adhere to a ceasefire, but not Israel, which is the UN member state. So in other words, Hamas is bound, but Israel is not bound. Does that make sense? It shouldn't. It's ridiculous. This is the broken nature of what we're talking about. But on top of that, this is a great point that's made in one of these clips we're going to show. And this is something that people keep arguing, that the very agreement itself finalizes with the destruction of Hamas. That's what Israel keeps pushing. So in what world would Hamas agree to something that would end with their annihilation? And Matt goes, well, because they claim they're fighting for the interest of Palestinians. Okay, but you keep telling us that's not true. So you can't point to that as the explanation if you tell us that's a lie. So that doesn't make any logical sense. On top of the point that you keep telling us that they're all terrorists, they don't care about anything, and they're killing everybody. But now we're supposed to be banking on their moral interest for the Palestinians? I mean, it's just none of what they say makes any sense because they're lying about everything. And as I wrote in regard to the hostages and the families in Israel, this is Ryan Rizbiani on the 4th saying Ben-Gvir is refusing to meet with Israeli hostages' families, or rather specifically the families, but then also former Israeli hostages. This is my point about why they don't want them to come home. They know what they don't want you to know. So here they are trying to get an audience with Ben-Gvir, and he goes, I'm good enough to sit, or this is what they said when he refuses to meet them. They say, I'm good enough to sit in Hamas's tunnels, but I'm not good enough to meet you. As he writes, their government is falling apart. And they're screaming. The point is that they're screaming at these people, and this keeps happening. And they keep bursting into the Knesset chambers. They keep saying, you don't care about our families. They don't care. I mean, this is self-evident. It just keeps building. And yet, what do you get from your media? What do you get from your government? Everybody supports Israel, and it's only the terrorist supporters that don't. No, most Israeli society right now wants them to take a deal. Not necessarily because they care about Palestine, but because they want their families to come home, or the Israelis that are there. And I simply said, as the Israeli government continues to use the hostages in Gaza in an attempt to emotionally manipulate the world, both the returned hostages and the families of these hostages are screaming that the Israeli government is getting them killed and refusing to meet them. Pay attention, Western audiences. Khaleesi highlights the same point. She's screaming at them, and she says, Israel has made so much noise about the hostages in Gaza. Their care is fake. Here's Israeli, Lana Gritsevsky, who was released from captivity in Gaza. Ben-Gvir walks away from her without meeting her. She's shouting, I'm good enough, like we said, to sit in the tunnels, but not to meet you. Her partner is apparently still being held captive in Gaza. Zionists don't care about the hostages. They only want ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. I absolutely agree with that. On that same note, here you saw this circulating, right? They were highlighting all these 4 hostages, Aviva Klampas, they were murdered. Well, same point I made before. Even Haaretz says that they were possibly killed by IDF fire. You read the article, it's not possibly. It says even mainstream media in Israel is now admitting that the hostages are being killed by IDF attacks. It's not now whether these people were, and you could prove it, which I think you can. We know that's happening. Their own hostages have said so. Their own people have said so. Their own military personnel, their tank drivers, their helicopter pilots, they've told you they were firing on civilians, whether indiscriminately or deliberately. Yasmin Porat, who said she saw it. She was in the house and then watched them fire on them. The many different cars they bombed as they were driving back to Gaza when they knew they were hostages. The point is, right now, in their indiscriminate bombing or targeted, they're killing their own people. That's not an accident, and they keep lying about it. Why would you have to come out and say they were all killed when even your own media says, no, they weren't. They were killed by your IDF bombings. Yet you get these fraction of a man kind of person like Michael Rappaport who says, entering the 9th month, and highlights some of these people that are still there. Of course, all the women, because they're trying to emotionally manipulate you in a very clear way that day. Well, okay, so if you care so much, why aren't you pushing your government to take the deal that would bring them home? Because when this comes to head, what did they say last time? We can't make a deal with Hamas. They're terrorists. We have to kill them all. Okay, so then you can't say this and then say that. You either care about one over the other or you don't. If your whole point is we need to bring them home and you act like we don't care, and then when the opportunity's there, you don't look at it, you yell that we shouldn't be taking the deal, you're a ridiculous person, which I think is the case either way, but that's obvious. Now, Jacob Migdid simply highlights where they currently were as of yesterday, going back and forth with this. And this is somebody writing for the Times of Israel. Bottom line, the opposition is not expected to influence the rest of the yet to be scheduled vote. My point is, first and foremost, that they already accepted this, and now they're acting like they're back to the drawing board, which is infuriating. But it says Israel also objects to the updated version's call for both sides to accept a hostage deal. Right. So Israel only wants Hamas to accept it. You have to do it, not us. It's just what we were hearing. That's what that's what Professor Boyle said. How is that even remotely honest? The earlier version only called on Hamas to accept a proposal. How stupid is that? The Israeli mission also did not like the updated version's inclusion of the 3 phases of the hostage deal, ones that have already been laid out and ones they've already agreed to under the assumption, I think, that Hamas wouldn't take it. Finally, the Israeli mission opposes new clause in the draft that, quote, rejects any attempt at demographic or territorial change in Gaza, including actions that reduce the territory of Gaza, such as through permanent establishment, officially or unofficially, of so-called buffer zones. So they don't like that. You know why? Do I need to explain it? They want to do that. That's why. They're already doing that. You know, the whole thing we're supposed to end is blood libel and conspiracy theory, anti-Semitism, that they're actively ethnically cleansing Gaza as we speak. And when they include that from the U.S. side, they reject it, because they want to do that. And he goes on, as the writer for Times of Israel, the bureau chief, and says Israel has already advanced plans to create a security buffer zone on the Gaza side of the border, which some of its officials have insisted are temporary, but the plan has been condemned by the U.S. and international community, and now they reject it in the agreement anyway. Are you confused? You shouldn't be. They're doing it. Some claim it's temporary, but then when they put it in the agreement that they have to not do that, they go, nope, won't accept it. Because it's temporary. Oh, yeah? This is how stupid they think you are, or how much they know they have influence over people like Biden or Trump or RFK or Sunak or any people in power right now. Now it says an update. It says Israel objects to the updated draft's call for both sides to be implemented hostage deal. The earlier version only called for Hamas to accept. The updated draft does the same, but also notes that the hostage deal proposal is acceptable to Israel. You see how stupid this is? So at the end of the day yesterday, the argument was, where it was left, is that, well, the new draft still only applies to Hamas, but they've included that Israel says it's okay, though. Except they have the opening to just go, never mind, because we didn't agree to it. This is cartoonish. And these people believe that this will work. Now, Khaleesi highlights the obvious reality. This is from the 4th. Israel planned to continue the genocide after the ceasefire, which is exactly my point. And we already know that's the case based on their own statements. So why not just agree to the dumb ceasefire and then go back to it anyway? Because they don't want their people back. It says why, and I only say dumb in the sense of what they're pretending, they're lying about it and so on. Obviously, we should all be screaming for an actual ceasefire. But she says, this is why Hamas didn't accept it. And this is what she's arguing after the fact, that I argue you could prove that Hamas did and Israel backed away from it. But the point is, the Israeli War Cabinet unanimously decided to demand guarantees from the United States for the continuation of the war after the ceasefire. Hamas received via Qatar The Israeli version of the proposal, they said, Israel's response does not abide the stopping of the war or withdrawing from Gaza. It does not agree with the principle set by Biden. The media is lying to everybody directly from Israeli talking points. Here is Ben-Gvir, the Israeli security minister, saying publicly he plans to fully ethnically cleanse, so that's what he frames it as, which I agree, but it's not what he says, and resettle with only Jews in Gaza. So this is his son, apparently, that says, Dad, what is the solution for Gaza? What is the solution for this very complicated issue? And he goes, okay, occupation, settlement, and encouragement of migration. It's just so flimsy. Like, this guy is one of the most just repugnantly violent and everything they do when you listen to them speak to their own people is screaming about the end of Palestine, how they're all terrorists. We should kill them all. They shouldn't exist. But here he goes, encouragement of migration, because this is a politically put out video. But here's how he goes on and says, only in this way can we solve the problem of Gaza. Not Hamas, Gaza. Oops. And it says, to occupy all the land, to settle in all the land, which is ethnic cleansing. So I agree with the framing. Be careful that he doesn't say that. But it says, and of course, to encourage the voluntary migration of as many people as possible. So the objective is to get rid of all the Palestinians. And you pretend that it's voluntary, despite the fact that they are so, and rightly so, hell-bent on staying, that they're withstanding your bombing campaigns. But now we're going to pretend that they're going to voluntarily shuffle out of the way, right? Here's why. He says, we need to live in security. Oh, wait, no, it says, hold on, I thought I missed the point there. Oh, that's strange. Did I miss it up front? I could have swore that it said, I guess not. Well, in any case, I don't want to just add my own comment. So the point is, he says, voluntary, as many people as possible to other countries. We need to live in security. Okay, so the fact that it's a Gaza problem and that the way they live in security is by having Palestinians out of the way, there's no way to misunderstand that. In his mind, Gaza, not Hamas, is the problem, and all Palestinians are what make them unsafe. There's just no way to misunderstand that. These people are disgusting, racist, terrible, subhuman people. That's what we're talking about. Because they are framing every single Palestinian as a monster and then pretending they're fighting for them while murdering them all. Now, here is what Matt Miller had to say about this conversation when Sam Husseini tries to question him about whether they're really committed to the ceasefire deal. Here's what he says.
Israel that is the roadblock to a ceasefire right now. It is not Israel that is a roadblock to hostages being returned.
Yeah, it really is, though. And that's what's so embarrassing about this is he knows that even the people in that room know that. Yet his job is to just sell you on the lie, even though he knows you're not buying it. And it says in the little clip there, Netanyahu says, no Gaza ceasefire until Israel's war aims are achieved, raising questions over Biden's peace proposal. That was June 1st. But it's only Hamas, even though they've already accepted it more than once, or that they've offered the ceasefire for full exchange 11 or 12 times now, that they either have ignored or not accepted. But it's only Israel, right, Matt Miller? What a complete clown.
600 trucks a day of humanitarian assistance coming in.
We'll get to that in a minute. Here he is towing one of the most egregious lies we can possibly. 600 trucks? He's lying to you about the only thing in the world claiming 600 trucks are the spokespeople for Israel, based on their narrative and a picture with nothing else to back it up. Meanwhile, every other entity involved in this conversation, including many in the U.S., have said they're continuing to hold the aid, block the aid, shoot people that go for the aid, including the foreign aid workers, the flower massacre. But I guess that's all just background noise now because he said 600, though.
Palestinians being able to safely return to their neighborhoods and eventually get to the reconstruction of Gaza. It is Hamas.
Okay, so he's pretending that they're going to get to go back, even though they're already shooting at any of them that goes back to their areas, that they're going to reconstruct, even though Ben-Gvir is openly telling you that no, we don't want them there, and we're going to build it the way we want to. Settlers are having entire conventions about how they're going to do this. They've allotted areas. They have construction ready. And Matt wants you to believe they're going to let them go back and let them rebuild. This guy is a genocidal complicit. He is allowing this to happen. And you know what? I think he knows that. My opinion.
All that is on the table in a proposal that is sitting with Hamas, as it has been sitting with Hamas for 6 days now, and we
Israel,
await their answer.
Did Israel accept the proposal?
Go ahead.
Can I follow up on the Hamas thing?
You just said it's with Hamas.
Please don't interrupt.
You see the point? Now, of course, he won't let Sam ask the question because the question highlights how ridiculous he is, which is that if it's in front of Hamas, that means Israel accepted it, right? Because that's how this works. They're in a room and they're making up a plan and they offer it to Hamas. Hamas is not in the room with them. Okay? So that's already what happened is his point. It's already been given to Hamas because Hamas has already accepted it because Israel already said it was good and then they reeled back. Already made the point. But of course, Matt Miller has to talk over him because he's desperately aware that people see right through him.
Sam, we've had this conversation before. Please don't interrupt me. Please don't interrupt your colleagues.
I'm not interrupting her.
Thank you.
I'm asking
Sam,
for clarification.
can I just follow up with my question?
So Israel
please?
accepted?
I think you are
Okay.
interrupting her.
All
Nadia,
right.
go ahead.
Thank
I mean, see, think about how embarrassing it is to avoid answering such a basic question. Did Israel accept it? We're not going to get into all that. I'm not going to hypothesize about things I don't know. Or just, the obvious reality that they did, or, I mean, you get the point. I can go into the same point again. They did because it was offered and they rolled it back.
Actually, a spokesman for Hamas just...
Decentered News goes on to make other points you can read for yourself. Now, here's an important part of this. I think this is very relevant. Apparently, CIA Director Burns is the U.S. element that is mediating the supposed diplomatic negotiations. Now, I'll let this person make the point because he makes it very well.
Who the lead negotiator is for the United States negotiating between Hamas and Israel? CIA Director Burns. Why is a CIA director? Why is the head of the intelligence, the undercover covert intelligence wing of the United States, why is he negotiating with what we accuse of a terrorist group and Israel's political party? Why is he the interlocutor? That's not a role for an intelligence officer. That's a role for a diplomat. That's a role for a statesman. That is not a role for a career intelligence official, somebody whose job is to lie and steal and cheat without getting caught. It shows how the United States views the conflict between Hamas and Israel. It shows that the United States does not view it through a diplomatic lens. Otherwise, they'd put a senior ambassador in there, they'd put a statesman in there, they'd put somebody from the president's cabinet in there.
Yeah, I think the point, I agree with everything. I think the major point to make is that's because they do not want, or rather that Israel does not want this to resolve. And they're the ones, I think, influencing the outcome here, even from within the United States. And here is just a quick little, update on just searching for this in general. And there's plenty of articles about it. CIA Director Burns visits Cairo as Gaza ceasefire. This says CIA Director Burns has been actively involved in negotiations to broker a ceasefire deal and hostage deal between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. So you're telling me he's working with Qatar, the group that is protecting Hamas, we're told, that Israel's totally angry about, even though they're allowing it to happen and have petitioned them in the past to keep funding Hamas? Right? There's obviously a bigger game going on, and it's very easy to see that it has nothing to do with peace or diplomacy. It's about keeping their agenda going. Now, here's what's interesting. Zachary Cohen highlights a CIA assessment, realizing that Burns is the one mediating the whole thing. Suddenly, as of today, a CIA assessment circulated among U.S. officials this week concluded that Netanyahu likely judges he can get away with without defining a post-war plan, even as Biden admin pressures him to bring an end to the conflict. Now, let's be clear. CIA does not necessarily mean in line with the executive branch. Usually it's quite the opposite. But at the very least, you can see that they're in some way aligned, I think, with the Israeli agenda, but just recognizing that intelligence is not always the same as saying what the current executive branch thinks. But this is just interesting to me. So this is a CNN article. The CIA assessment, which Burns is the head of, is putting out circulating for whatever reason. Well, Netanyahu believes he can just not define the plan. Now, is that meant to set that tone? Is that meant to subtly nudge him into doing so? I don't know. But it seems very manipulative. We are being played in every possible way. It doesn't mean that they're all necessarily in the same in line for the same agenda, that they want the same outcome. But in every angle, these people are not there to give you the truth or to mediate some ceasefire in the interest of Palestinians. They are actively fighting to gain what they want from this for their interest, almost always at the expense of the people involved. That's government for you. Now, speaking of Qatar, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Qatar on Twitter posted their statement. Qatar strongly condemns Israeli occupation's bombing of the UNRWA school, which we'll talk about next. Interesting. This was today. Now, I get the feeling this might change a couple things. We might see different narratives spin around. We might see things actually happen. I think wait and see. There's a lot you got to hypothesize about. But seeing Qatar, who is involved with the mediations, who I argue in some way are overlap with the interest of what they deal with Hamas in regard to Israel, are now criticizing their actions. Maybe because they see an interest in it, maybe because they genuinely think that. But I think Israel, in their typically belligerent and immature way, are going to freak out and make a statement about this, and we'll see where that goes. Whether that's them trying to switch up the Hamas narrative about only Qatar, or maybe going after Qatar, I don't know. But it will ultimately expose Israel's interest in all of it, I argue. We'll see. Now, talking about the UNRWA school, I wanted to make sure we highlighted this. Now, the main point, like I said the other day, this is, actually, I should have brought up I don't want to try to find it right now, but it's unbelievable how many schools, how many hospitals, every element of this are so far beyond what we've ever seen before. The amount of civilians, the amount of bombings they've used, more than World War II, it's unreal. So my point is, this is just one long string of illegitimate war crime, genocidal attacks on schools full of children. The fact that that's even debatable, the people are arguing, no, here's why that's okay, is chilling. An airstrike on the UN-run Al-Sardani school in central Gaza has now killed 40 people, including 14 children. UNRWA spokesperson said the agency, quote, has paid the highest toll ever over the 8 past months. And this is just showing you sad images. That's just their interview with her, and that she's from UNRWA. Here's another example. A large number of displaced Palestinians were killed in the Israeli airstrike that targeted the UNRWA school. This one in a Nusrat refugee camp. Now, here's what's interesting. Thank you to We Are All Palestine for highlighting this. Tariq highlights this, saying, we've reached the point where Israel is just like, yeah, we did it. We just bombed a UN school, serving as a shelter for refugees. So what? And that's how he frames it, right? But that's kind of the sentiment we feel right now. Why waste time? What is that? I don't think I've ever seen that one. As he says, speak in an evasive way. That's interesting. I'll have to look that. It's always interesting to see new things. Or basically giving fake apologies, lying about this. If you ever face any accountability anyways, right? So they never get held accountable. They never seem to actually have any pushback from the most of the people that are acting like they care about this. So why put forward, why not just own, that's what he's saying. Why not just go, yeah, we did it, so what? I think there's a reason for that. I think that there's an important dynamic involved for at least putting forward the illusion for those that you still may be manipulating, or those that don't want to see the truth. That'll always be on your side as long as you don't push them hard enough. But so this is the breakdown saying Israeli military admits to attack by jet fighters on UNRWA school. Right? But the point is now they're owning it, but they're just going, but Hamas was there. That's actually exactly like we all expected. That is what's happening. Now here's another back and forth. Matt Miller, as of yesterday, talking about the UN school. Here's how he responds. It's painful.
Not cross the red line that the president laid out, several weeks ago. This is the second incident in less than 2 weeks where we've seen a pretty large civilian toll on what was supposed to be a precision strike.
So with respect to the policy that the president announced, he was speaking specifically to a large-scale operation in Rafah, and we have not yet seen a large-scale operation conducted in Rafah. That said, we have seen...
So that continues to be the game, at least to begin with. Oh, it's not large yet. Okay, so as long as we keep saying it's small, they can do what they want? Yes. Hasn't crossed the large line yet, even though we waffle about what that really looks like. Apparently, according to Kirby, until they're lined up in columns marching down the street, it's not a large operation, which, by the way, guarantees that they'll continue bombing indiscriminately from the sky, which guarantees more civilian casualties than if they were to actually go in and surgically invade. But, the U.S. won't allow it, so they'll keep indiscriminately bombing civilians because Matt Miller says. That's basically what's happening.
Strikes that put civilians in danger well before the president said that, and we have made clear to the government of Israel that we expect them to do everything that they can to minimize civilian harm. We've been
another one of the game the entire time. Well, as long as they claim they're doing their best, it's all okay. despite breaking records across the board. Hey, they're trying their best, Matt says. So stop being rude. It's embarrassing.
This before, it applies in this situation too. It is a difficult situation if it is true that you have this site where Hamas is hiding inside a school.
If it's true, okay, so you're giving them the benefit of the doubt. They've said this about every school and every hospital and every location they've bombed, they claim are killing civilians. Oh, Hamas was present. And even human rights groups, even the UN said the onus is on you. You can't just keep saying that. This was the first week. They said you have to prove that. They never have. The U.S. doesn't care about that. The rules-based international order goes, yeah, we'll just take your word for that. It's not about anything other than politics, guys. They're siding with their ally for the interest of either because they're compromised or for some interest we can't see. Because I'm saying that because they're seemingly destroying everything around them to maintain a lie for Israel that we all see and everybody knows is a lie.
Militants are hiding inside a school. Those individuals are legitimate targets, but at the same time, they're embedded near civilians. Israel has a right to try and target those civilians, but they also have the obligation to minimize civilian harm and take.
Sorry, I was muted. So he definitely just said that they have the right to kill civilians. Now, as I understand it, you can call it a Freudian slip. You can say that he meant it. But as I understand it, I think Matt Lee followed up and addressed it. And he was like, oh, yeah, sorry, I meant the other way around. Which, whatever. That whether or not he meant to say he has a right to kill the militants, they're killing civilians. So it's kind of a moot point. But what's hilarious about it is that's exactly what's happening. We see it happening. Every group in the world that is other than Matt Miller and the U.S. government are calling that out. And so he just accidentally said they have a right to kill civilians, which, by the way, is exactly what Israel's argument is. It's you just one step removed. It's because human shields that we have a right to kill those people. That's what their argument is. That's why this gets so absurd right now, what he's about to say. Because we all know this. Their argument is that they can kill them because it's not our fault. Hamas is using them. And they even have their lavender breakdown. They can kill 100 people if they go after one Hamas member that's big enough. That's their own argument, which doesn't align with any law anywhere. In fact, that it's a violation of every law everywhere. But they just wrote it down, so it's okay, right? And so the argument becomes, we are claiming we can and have the right to kill civilians as long as Hamas is doing what we claim they're doing, even though we don't prove it. So that is true, even if it was a slip.
Every step possible to minimize.
Rather, to be clear, they believe it's true. In fact, it's shockingly illegal and grotesque, but they believe it.
Civilian harm. So that's Israel has a right to try and target those civilians, but they also have the obligation to minimize civilian harm and take every step possible to minimize civilian harm. So that's.
And the idea that they're supposed to take every step possible to minimize civilian harm, that's verifiably false. When they are indiscriminately bombing food trucks and bombing aid workers from other countries and sniping children, waving white flags. This is the point about how infuriating this is. They all see the same stuff. They just ignore it. Then stand up and say that they're taking unprecedented action to minimize every human rights group, every element that's highlighted this have done their own investigations. Even corporate media has said, no, sorry, they're targeting civilians. It's just comically stupid, macabre, I should say, because it's so serious and real. But in its own right, it's laughable how these people continue just to state the lie. No, when the evidence is overwhelming in one direction, they just go, but Israel said.
That's why we were pressing the government of Israel and the IDF to be completely transparent about what happened here. We want to know the facts as much as anyone.
Have they?
You know what the facts are? Don't ask. We already did it. We didn't kill him. You're a liar. Every single time. They don't investigate. They don't even show you anything. And if they pretend they did, they just claim the outcome. Well, we did, and here's the outcome. There's no evidence. There's no research. And yet, even sometimes after that fake conclusion, Matt Miller pretends like they're still investigating. I've shown you that live on the show.
Have they taken every step possible?
We have seen as much as anyone.
Have they taken every step possible?
We have seen them take improvements over time, but still, if it bears true that this strike resulted in the death of 14 children.
If it bears true, you see, now this is disgusting. This gets into the realm of them. Like, okay, so if you're going to fine Alex Jones $1 billion for denying the fact that children died in Sandy Hook, even though there's a lot of things that you should look into in that conversation we've talked about on the show itself, you're now pretending you don't know those children got killed, even though it's verifiable fact, even though international bodies have acknowledged even their bodies can be seen on the video. But, we are not sure because it could be. How is that different?
The results aren't where
I'll even take it a step further. How about the fact that it's worse because what they're doing is in real time, allowing them to keep doing that right now. Children dying this moment as I speak are Matt Miller's fault, along with a lot of other people that are allowing it to continue. To me, that's a hell of a lot worse.
They need to be. So it gets back to this question of intent and results, even if the intent is what the IDF has said publicly, that they were trying to use a precision strike just to target 20 to 30 militants.
Oh, you mean 20 to 30 civilians around one, which is what they keep telling you the reality is, or the fact that they're not precision targeting anything with dumb bombs bombed on top of refugee camps, which is what they're using in most cases.
You have seen 14 children die in that strike. That shows that something went wrong. That said, these are all facts that need to be verified, and that's what we want to see happen.
Oh yeah, oopsie, something went wrong. Yeah, in other words, that's a crime, Matt. Somebody, you don't just get to go, whoopsie, we aimed the wrong thing, we used the wrong button. It's not how that goes. But according to him, if it's any other adversaries, this would already be shuffling through. Like, the point is, he acts like we have to wait till the end of all this to rehash everything and investigate all the acts. It's not what you did with Russia. It's not what you do with China. It's not what you do with anybody, Iran, or anybody else you aim at. These are just disgusting hypocrites that are gaslighting for genocide as we speak. Now, this was Marshall just highlighting the same clip. I wasn't sure if that was in that one before I grabbed that. But at the same point, just a quick clip showing that we have a right to kill civilians. Now, as the squirrel highlights, 8 months of genocidal slaughter after slaughter, and lie after lie to cover it up, and still the media class, BBC, Reuters, New York Times, dutifully lead the Israeli propaganda line, quote, there was a Hamas there, right? After each massacre, without any evidence to back it up, as just now at the bombing of the UN school. Most of them just repeated what Israel said. And they all do it with the pride and glee. He says they love it. Now, that's his opinion, but I agree. It seemed to be going along with it. All these scum who cry hysterically as they write, oh my God, bloodbath, massacre in Ukraine by evil Putin Hitler, just love whitewashing and laundering daily Israeli genocidal massacres of babies. He goes on to highlight it's not just 8 months. The Israeli regime has been doing this for nearly a century, massacring Palestinian women, children, babies, and then just plain lying about it over and over and over. And we've been highlighting that finally people are paying attention. He says they killed journalists and nurses in broad daylight, literally on camera, and still their lies, their doctored fake videos and photos get New York Times and BBC headlines. And the entire framing is, yeah, the Israeli claim is definitely true. The rest is Hamas scum. Remember, they killed an American journalist. Not like that's any more important than any other journalist. But the point was, as an American, and as the American support for Israel seems to be the most important thing, they ignored it, didn't even talk about it. Now, this is Shireen Abu Akleh. Not only did they lie about it, then they lied again and got caught, lied again and got caught, until the fourth time they ended up going, okay, fine, we shot her, but it was an accident. Maybe a ricochet. That's kind of where it ended up, I think. And then proceeded to beat everybody who were carrying her coffin, just to pay you back for highlighting that they were liars. What happened? Now he goes, go look over at the New York Times, BBC, Reuters, AP reports on Russian strikes in Ukraine. He says whoops, that was weird. Go and look at the ones in Ukraine and try to find a single example, literally just one, of them leading the headline when first sentence with, Russia said the building was used by the Azov Nazis or Azov militants. It's a fair point. They've said that about a lot of them, and in many cases has turned out to be true, but they don't say it because they're slanted for clear political interests. That's not journalism. You're not a journalist, and they know that. Most of them somewhere inside have realized that at some point. He says 504 children killed in 2 years there, but they're human to the West media class. Palestinians are subhuman to them because they're Nazis. They're Zionist Nazis who divide humanity. You know, the narratives are spinning out. The point is, here's John Kirby embodying this ideology, the narratives, and even the fake crocodile tears to sell you on one versus the other.
Hard to look at what he's doing in Ukraine, what his forces are doing in Ukraine, and think that any ethical, moral individual could justify that. It's difficult to look at the It's difficult to look at some of the images and imagine that any well-thinking, serious, mature leader would do that. So I can't talk to his psychology, but I think we can all speak to his depravity. This is war. It is combat. It is bloody. It is ugly, and it's going to be messy. And innocent civilians are going to be hurt going forward. I wish I could tell you something different. I wish that that wasn't going to happen, but it is going to happen. And that doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it dismissible. It doesn't mean that we aren't going to still express concerns about that and do everything we can to help the Israelis do everything they can to minimize it. But that's unfortunately the nature of conflict. All I can tell you is we're going to continue to make sure Israel has the tools and the capabilities that they need to defend themselves. We're going to continue to try to get that humanitarian assistance in. We're going to continue to try to get hostages and people out of Gaza appropriately. And as I think you've heard us say, a ceasefire right now really only benefits Hamas. That's where we are right now. And
Isn't that interesting?
I understand the question, but I'm just not going to get ahead of where things are.
Yeah, that was the beginning of it, where even the Israeli media or the government was saying, well, hostages are secondary. Yeah, now it's pretending that it didn't happen phase. Clearly, that's what they were saying. Well, we can't even get into that. So they allowed this to continue right up until this point. But think about what he was doing right there. I made the point then. If you believe for 1 second that John Kirby, who's somebody who has been involved with this stuff for a very long time, seen some terrible things, is going to recall the memory of an image, he didn't have it in front of him, and get choked up by it. I mean, I saw all that stuff too. What are you pointing at? What right there jumped into your mind that caused you to break down in tears? Guys, he was lying very clearly. It wasn't even that convincing. And then while we're watching children get blown to pieces and beheaded by their bombings, you're not even acknowledging that? Not buying it. Now, here's what Z-Squirrel finished with, saying, after all of this, and starting with, again, the idea of the UN the school bombing, he's saying, okay, after all that, get ready for another fake docu video or audio to be released and to deflect from the news cycle of their latest massacre and beheadings of babies and children and women, an entire media class, once again, using it to launder the genocidal massacre. And then bing, bang, boom, it's exactly what happened right after that. This is from yesterday. And I just love this little break clip. I think, I'm not sure who made this. Might have been Gatto here. But it's like a 5-second clip of Abby Martin that I'll play for you in a second. But look at what they did again. Every single time. That's why it's so humorous to look in a dark way what the squirrel just said. Get ready for, and he called it, get ready for another fake audio that they've already been caught for like 3 times, where they can prove it was a constructed audio or people that weren't even Arabic or speaking Arabic, or things like this. They go, here's an aerial photo of the building that we say Hamas was in. And what's the proof? Red stuff with circles. Proof. No, not at all, in fact. But it says, this is Scott Ritter, says, when can we cross-examine you in court? How do we handle discovery? Shut up already. You're guilty. The point is, this is so embarrassing. You think that's evidence for you to just state your narrative with a graphic? It's really bad. And so this is what he pointed out from Abby Martin, which was a previous example, but it's the exact point.
See, the building is red. That means Hamas is there.
That is the perfect level of ridicule. They're treating you like you're 5. See, I put the red around the building. That's because bad guy there. That's what they're doing. And then washing their hands of it. We're done, right? Didn't we prove it to you? Aren't you supposed to blindly trust what Israel says about everything? Isn't that what we've been used to for 75 years? Yeah, pretty much. Not entirely 75 years, but for a long period. Well, here is what some of the lead propagandists have been saying about this bombing. Same thing. No evidence to back it up, just stating the narrative. Here's BBC going Israeli strike on UN school, kills 35. Or the supposed international human rights lawyer named Arsen Atrovsky says, no, Israel did not strike a UN school in Gaza, even if you claim Hamas is there, it's still a UN school, dummy. But he goes, Israel targeted Hamas terrorists who were embedded in a UN school, the latter being a gross war crime. Right, not bombing the school or killing 14 children, but the claim that Hamas might be there is the crime. As long as the West, he says, diplomats, leaders, media, cannot distinguish this. Distinguish implies that there's things that you're looking between. What you're doing is going narrative. And then they're going, here's the video of the children that were killed, the evidence that was there, people on the ground, journalists that said they were no Hamas members, doctors who saw the same evidence, almost proof. And you just go narrative, and that's them distinguishing between you screaming something and facts? Yeah, I wonder why they're not confused. It says they embolden Hamas and perpetuate the violence. These are desperate people. There's no way that they recognize that they're losing this. And that's the best they got. And of course, I just simply post this beneath him. Independent review in April of this year found no evidence that Israel's claims were correct. Oops. I love that. I made it up. Source. Now, of course, this is funny to me that this is, oh yeah, see, it's got the Israel flag on it. So it's not to me. It's about what Israel's doing. But here's Elon Levy doing the same damn thing. And here's Philippe Lazzarini. And again, he is the Commissioner General of UNRWA. Another horrific day in Gaza. Another UNRWA school turned shelter, attacked. This time in Nusrat. You know, the area they've supposedly secured like 4 times now. Hit overnight by Israeli forces without prior warning. So that's important to this, right? But despite all of their claims, Hamas present and so on, they're supposed to be like, hey, civilians, get out of the way. That's the only thing. Let's so it's clear. Even when they do that and then bomb these schools, hospitals, and so on, they're still breaking the law. Collective punishment is the reality no matter what their claims are. That was the point from the very beginning. From international rights, human rights lawyers, the UN. Just because they said Hamas present doesn't mean they got away with killing up, but they're going to do it still. But the point is, then Israel made the difference by, the caveat by saying, but we're giving them time to leave. And they really pushed it. That's why they weren't breaking the law. So now they don't do that anymore. Nobody cares. They just bombed the building, didn't try to give them a chance. Why? Because they want to kill all the Palestinians. But here's what he says. When I say UN officials are covering for Hamas, this is what I mean. What am I missing? Is there something else posted there? So you mean that he's saying the thing that you're claiming as a lie? Like, is that supposed to be convincing? Usually when you say something like that, it's like a big brand point. See, like that's him saying that doesn't prove that you're wrong, that you're telling the truth. This is just you saying, I disagree. But he goes, claims Hamas is operating out of UN facilities are not shocking. This is Hamas MO. This is the 5th UN facility in a month that they've bombed. Sure. There's been not a single point of evidence to suggest Hamas was there. Hamas routinely operates at civilian sites. If you don't know this, resign. Okay, get the point? The best they can do, same thing here, same link, is just state the opposite. And the real point is that across the board, the United States, Canada, the UN, multiple independent reviews, countries around the world have come back and said, this is from March, Israel has yet to provide any evidence to back up those claims about October 7th or being in Hamas. Here is from April 22nd of this year. Israel has yet to provide evidence of UNRWA staff terrorist links. Here's NPR from April 23rd. Reports on UNRWA concludes Israel has not provided evidence of their militancy. This is from April 28th. And this is the biggest one. An independent review finds no evidence for Israel's claims about UNRWA and Hamas. So this has been reviewed numerous times. And if you're of the mind that Israel has been presenting evidence, or rather that they have an opportunity to, and they didn't here, explain that for me. So if you think it's completely sound and the evidence is overwhelmingly clear, wouldn't they just give it? Wouldn't they be going, here, look, it's right there. And if they did, and they still didn't find it, then obviously there's lies taking place. And it's not about one group versus the other. It's everybody except Israel. Even the United States elements have been like, there's not any evidence. And I'm just for time, I'm going to skip over this, but just really quickly, UNRWA themselves, which on top of it, the group being accused, challenging it is never the best way to reach people. But nonetheless, UNRWA itself has said they're lying, citing alleged intelligence estimates about them working with Hamas. They simply go, UNRWA has not received any information, let alone any evidence from Israel about whether that never received a single thing. Which, of course, Israel says their narrative is that they're not going to work with them anyway. But the point is that nobody, the UNRWA, the United Nations, United States, Canada, nobody has seen this because it doesn't exist. In regard to what they're claiming. It's certainly, even likely that there's an overlap there because they forced Hamas into power, funded them into power, Israel did, in Gaza, and then made it so people in Gaza couldn't do anything without working through the government, which was Hamas at the time. And so there's a lot of overlaps there. Doesn't mean everybody's terrorist Hamas killers, but that's what they're claiming. But then even then, on top of that possible likelihood, the evidence isn't there for any of it. Now you can read through this for yourself. Now, of course, that's why they're getting condemnations from across the board as they are pushing the idea of labeling UNRWA as a terrorist organization. Now, this is just other than the UNRWA school or the different bombings you've seen, or the starvation tactics we'll get to in a second. This is just never ending, guys. These are just from the last 2 days, as I understand, or as I remember. Because I think I've included some new things, but I don't think any of them are older than a couple of days. Deir al-Balah in the central Gaza Strip this evening, as of the 6th. I mean, this image is what I used for today's show. It's just self-explanatory. The area where the Israeli army instructed civilians to evacuate. Okay, so over here you have them bombing a school without even telling anybody, knowing there were civilians, knowing that they were refugees, people staying there, children, women, sickly. They bombed them all. 14 children died. Here, you're looking at the location that they were told to go to be safe. Nothing new there either. Look at these civilians just standing in the street. That is like a block down the road. That's what they're dealing with. They're bombing where they're supposed to be safe. There is nowhere safe. That's the point. And I'll include this for those that haven't seen it. Haaretz, covering the New York Times investigation, Israel used the most destructive bombs in their safe areas. Surprise, surprise. It's nothing new. Here, Israel's committing major massacres in the central region of Gaza, killing at least 150 people in the last 24 hours, most of them women and children. This is from the 6th. Just the wrap up of the day. Another 150 random people killed, most women and children, but the most moral army in the world. Taking best possible, all possible routes to avoid civilian casualties, and they just arbitrarily murder 150 people, most civilians, all women and children. Or I only say most women and children. As far as I can tell, there's not a single provable example of any Hamas members being killed. I always argue that's highly unlikely, but nonetheless, we have yet to see a single example that they've proven. Sad morning, Mustem points out, for Gaza during the night. This was on the 6th, over into, I believe, from the 5th to the 6th. During the night, Israeli occupation forces, 1, committed horrible crimes by bombing of a refugee shelter in Al-Nusra, that's the UN school, killing 27, or I think it went up to 34 after he published this. Committed another crime by bombing the Al-Hor family in Al-Buraj refugee camp, killing 7. Committed a third crime in the bombing of a house hosting displaced people in Al-Nusrat. Killed 2 people in a bombing house of Deir al-Balah. Killed several people in separate attacks across Gaza. This is Rami Abdul from Euromed Human Rights Group. The Israeli army has resumed shelling Palestinian civilians as they attempt to inspect their own homes. I was just telling you about this. After the army withdraws, either with drones or faraway munitions. These people, they've withdrawn, and then they just set traps and shoot people and bomb them just because they're going back. This is civilians who are also recovering. There's civilians who are recovering bodies of those who have been crushed by Israeli tanks. Some alive, some not. Like as in alive when it happened, right there. He also highlights an Israeli drone bombed a group of children in the Zaitun neighborhood of East Gaza, injuring 30 people. This is just another day in Gaza right now, guys. It's all about the most these are all children. Look at the images for yourself. There's no denying what's going on. There's just not. And they are murdering children at a rate I don't think anybody's ever seen before. Now, since last October, they have dropped over 75,000 tons of bombs in the Gaza Strip, exceeding the combined totals that were dropped on Dresden, Hamburg, and London during World War II. But, taking the most precautions possible, no one believes that. 75 tons. So let's just make it 1,000 ton bombs. That's 75,000 of them. And we know it's not all those big bombs. Clearly, this is unprecedented. Now, as I highlighted briefly yesterday, just to continue to show you the things that are happening, Max Blumenthal highlights that Israeli officers have provably, based on CNN investigations, or either I think this one was, never mind. This one was the phasing out of it. But there was, which one was it? I think it was the New York Times investigation, as well as a couple of others that literally talked about this stuff. Sodomized Palestinian prisoners to death after kidnapping them in a concentration camp. According to a leaked UN report, one prisoner said interrogations, quote, made me sit on something like a hot metal stick and it felt like fire. He said another detainee died after they put that electric stick up his anus. That's the reality. This is the New York Times. Let that sink in for a second and recognize who you're actually supporting. I think the problem is that most of the people that support Israel don't care about that. In fact, they like that. They go, yeah, kill those Palestinians. That seems to be what I'm seeing every day. But if you haven't seen this, I'm hoping this is shocking you into understanding what's going on. And all of a sudden, Israel phasing out the use of that exact camp, which simply shows you that they're recognizing that people are seeing what they're doing. They don't care about it. They know they're doing it. They just don't want you to recognize it. Mohammed Shihada simply highlights the same story. Israel's raping, kidnapped Gazans in the, I'm going to pronounce that, the Sad Tamim prison camp. The Gazan died. It was the same point. It's just, I don't want to say it again. Horrible stuff. Cuts News Network highlights today another mass grave. After Israeli occupation forces withdrew from the area, Palestinians discovered a mass grave in Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza, where they have gone back numerous times, bombed indiscriminately, been caught for it over and over and over. And this is just another Gaza reporter from the ground highlighting the same, another mass grave in northern Gaza. Now here's just a upsetting video. So with what's going on, supposedly waging a war against Hamas while you're just indiscriminately killing anybody in front of you, including your own people, an Israeli military operation in the West Bank. I'll show you the video. Going after a child because they wrote "Free Palestine" on a wall. Sort of like in the U.S. where you just posted the wrong thing about Israel, and or rather in the UK more often at this point, show up at your door and say you said the wrong thing. Free Palestine. That's what he wrote. Now watch the way this looks. This is what you see with an army that prides itself on attacking children and women. Clearly, you're making a big point about this. I think it's because it's a win. We won by getting this child. This was posted on Israeli channels. There he is. Oh, how brave. What a real live professional army you are. Here is another example. This is just a quick example, which is happening constantly, of a young kid on a scooter. An Israeli IDF Jeep comes up behind him, shoots him, stops to make sure he's dead, then moves forward. This is the daily life for average Palestinians. Shoots him right there, falls off, clearly shot. He just dies right there, just dead. Stop, make sure. I can't tell if they shoot him again. Doesn't look like it. I think it might have something move right there. But that's it. Just move along. All right, so if this was supposedly the only democracy in the Middle East, wouldn't they stop and go, is he okay? Can we get you medical treatment? Does anybody actually buy those lies? Here's an unnerving video. And this is in regard to the crimes that have been committed and publicly posted by the very people acting like they're not doing this. He says, an organizational culture systematically dehumanizing Palestinians.
To be honest, I've never seen anything like that in 15 years of study of armed conflict. The fact that our soldiers themselves taking them and uploading them, it shows that there is an organizational culture systematically dehumanizing Palestinians.
Regarde, je vais montrer son dos, tu vas rigoler. Ils l'ont torturé.
Here we are talking about an open acknowledgement in front of cameras by the person uploading it that torture has been inflicted on these detainees. We have seen soldiers joyfully destroying toys stores, pillaging private property from family houses, or displaying their pictures with lingerie, degrading approaches to Palestinian women. This is also a war crime. When we are talking about 1, 2, 20, 40 incidents, it makes sense to just talk about war crimes. However, here we are witnessing something different.
Interestingly enough, as the article writes, it says the Israeli government released a legal paper in November supporting the military's actions in Gaza. Yeah, it says the paper repeatedly refers to civilians in Gaza as human shields. That's the point we're making from day one. They made these categories where there was no way you could exist there without being in one of them. Either you voted for them and support them, you're being used as a human shield, or you refuse to get out of the way. Are not our fault. So no matter what they did, they could make an excuse to say that's on them. And so here, the point is, in this discussion, they're not saying provable examples where we can see they're used as human shields. Just any Palestinian is regarded as a human shield by default, by being in Gaza. And what's interesting is that's actually the argument made about all of Israel and the illegal settlements perfectly surrounding, like basically a human shield barrier around what's going on, or the IDF headquarters or the Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, like in the center, surrounded by all the, it's clear the way that they engage with this, or the provable example of they use human shields called the neighbor procedure.
By saying so, the target of the army enlarges and enlarges and enlarges until it covers the entirety of Gaza. This poses an existential threat to the international legal system. So we should be all mobilizing for defending these boundaries. These are minimum boundaries, below which there is only an abyss. And this is the abyss that has unfolded in these months in Gaza.
It's just highlighting for those of the podcast that they've documented torture, sexual abuse, dog attacks, much of which you could see on video, but it's all denied and gaslit. You're a racist if you talk about it. People having their hands bound so tight they have to have their hands amputated. I mean, it's just overwhelming.
Arms embargo and sanctions. Political leaders that do not push for those are substantially declaring that the Palestinian population can be eliminated.
Right. And let's not forget that what we just talked about, the UN has now put them on a blacklist for those that kill children. They should be sanctioning them. They should be removing these. So thank you to Go Start in the Rumble chat. They just posted this link. And this is Dr. Lenz Veritatis highlighting a new clip that has surfaced exposing the inhumane treatment of Palestinian detainees. Now, this is, I argue, probably from this same camp that we were just talking about. Is Israel's Channel 13 exclusive shows female soldiers selecting Palestinians from above the mesh cage, dehumanizing them as monsters. Now it's in Hebrew. I don't know what they're saying, but the point is that they're treating them like animals. My God. And realize this is why we have yet to get a provable example of a Hamas member. And also realize that even the New York Times is breaking down rape, torture, dog attacks. That's what they're talking about in these locations. It's amazing the amount of evidence we have right now, and yet people are still debating this stuff. Here's a great exchange with Saeed Erekat and Matt Miller. Another embarrassing one for him. But here's Saeed highlighting self-evident truths. Matt Miller sidestepping them as always.
And Serrat was an area that the Israelis even did not ask people to evacuate. I mean, this is really...
and what we were just talking about, right? Highlighting an example where they bombed a location where they knew civilians were and did not even try to get them out of the way.
Refugees, they killed 64 people. We don't know how many was killed. I mean, what possible advantage? I want to ask you, because the other day you said that maybe Sinwar prefers, the safety of the tunnels, the comfort of the tunnels, to coming out and so on. So why would Hamas militants, what possible tactical advantage or strategic advantage for them to be in the school? Isn't it just like, that red herring, something that the Israelis could use time and time and time again as, a cover to continue to kill people? I mean, considering that, 130 civilians were killed in the preceding 24 hours.
So the advantage to Hamas, and it is a sickening advantage to them, is that they think they can hide behind civilians and prevent from being struck. And there have been times, I can tell you, hold on, there have been times that we know that Israel has passed on taking strikes because there were Hamas
Are you kidding me?
Militants who were embedded directly with civilians. And
I mean, let's talk about that. How in the world can you make an argument that they've passed on bombing civilians because they were there, even though we've heard endlessly that if they're there, it's because of Hamas and that they have a right to bomb them? Why would they just go then? Okay, not that one though. I just don't feel like it. Where's the logic here? And realize the whole reality. And look, he just pointed out that there were. I mean, the 972 magazine highlighted that they already have a ratio. They claim they can kill 1 to 200 innocent people based on a high-level Hamas commander or just a high-level Hamas member. So you're going to tell me that they would pass on 10 civilians being killed because it's too much? They have a very clear stated logic that they can go as high as that. So this is the point. Everything they say, you can point, I mean, even the same day half the time, even the same briefing, you can point things that they said in the beginning and you go, that contradicts what you just said. Sometimes it gets highlighted by the few select people in there that care to highlight these things, and I point them out every time. But that's just sad.
And they made the decision that they could not take a strike against a militant without causing disproportionate civilian harm. So that
disproportionate. So I guess more than 200 people dead for one person, like the Jabalia refugee camp. And even Wolf Blitzer couldn't accept that. 200 dead people plus actually for one person that wasn't even there. So I guess we don't circle back and go, okay, now it's a crime since there wasn't a guy there. No, we don't care. Or Matt doesn't care really.
That has happened, and there are militants who were not. There were strikes that they did not take because of that reason. Now,
can somebody please follow up on that? I'll try myself, but I'd love to prove that. Show me one example where Israel has done that or even stated that they've done that. And I'd love to see that. How many people? What was the logic? I don't believe it. I flat out don't believe that. I don't think that's true.
With respect to this one, we need to know exactly what happened. As I said, and as you just pointed out, there are conflicting accounts about what exactly happened here, and that's why we need.
All we have is that Israel says, no, bad guys were here, and then you believe it. That's the conflicting accounts. Everybody else says the same thing, the truth.
Need to get to the bottom of it.
We are no military experts. At least I speak about myself, but one knows from reading so much and so on. I mean, the safety of the rubble area, the safety of the destroyed cities and buildings and so on, that becomes a concrete jungle. It's a lot safer for these fighters. There would be no incentive whatsoever for them to go and be among their families and so on, because the food is probably better in the tunnels or in these places. Safety is a lot better. Why would they do it?
Okay, so again, too much logic for Matt Miller. The point is that he's highlighting the obvious thing. That, okay, well, what's the benefit here? Well, actually, no, let me let Matt answer it, then I'll make my point, because it's important what he answers on this.
Anything that Israel can say.
So number one, I just think established exactly why they would do it. Number two, I just don't think as a factual matter, it's actually in dispute that they have done it, and they continue to do it.
Okay, well, I guess he already said it. So the point was first that he's saying, I already made that clear, which is that they feel that they can hide behind them to protect themselves. Okay, so let's break it down. Saeed is asking, what's the benefit, right? Why would they do that instead of going in an area that's better protected, that's harder to see, that they actually have more access? Okay. And Matt Miller says because, well, they think they can hide behind them. So you tell me what 8 months of them bombing civilians shows Hamas they can hide behind them today. Oops, logic. Right. So if Israel has been stating publicly, which Hamas can hear, that we will bomb the civilians if they are being held there, which is, that's the way they frame it, just being there, or bombing civilians for any other reason, even if they're not being held as human shields, then that makes the clear statement that they're not worried about bombing the civilians. So Hamas will go, okay, so this doesn't work anymore. I can't hold them as you. The point is they've never even proven that, despite what Matt Miller lies about right there. As Robert has pointed out, the UN did their own investigation before October 7th and just concluded they could not verify it. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. I've always said this. I find it hard to believe it hasn't. But they have not, they could not verify Israel's claims. And as we said, international organizations said it was on Israel to prove it, and they still have not. So we're coming back to his point that, okay, so as they've made it clear relentlessly that they will not be swayed by civilians being present, we're going to pretend that Hamas just keeps doing it anyway, just in case. In fact, the point is it seems it draws their fire when there's civilians present. In any case, that's just stupid. It doesn't logically line up with what you're saying and what they know. But I guess that's the best you got. You just got to fall back to the same old talking points because that's the only thing that they think is holding this together. I argue that it's already been blown apart. It's over. They've already lost in every sense of the word.
Yeah.
We have seen clear, convincing evidence. Some of that evidence has been made public of them hiding in civilian targets.
Oh, okay. You already slipped in there at the end. Clear, convincing evidence, some of which will be public. Some, I can't even do it as fast as he did. Some of which will be made public. Be made public. Not yet, though. Not yet. We got to wait. Wait until it's all done. Then we'll make it public. You're a liar. And as somebody wrote in the chat, The Hague is waiting for you, Matt. I mean, it's sad. And he's one of the most vivid on the, I mean, because he's out there every day. Clear examples of complicity for genocide. Blinken, Biden. I mean, it's crazy how obvious it is. The bottom line is they're bombing these people. You know that, and you're gaslighting all of it to hide the fact that you know they're killing civilians. The logic just doesn't apply.
Going back before October 7th, and that has continued to be one of their primary tactics since October 7th.
You know, I tell you what.
And I should say, launching, in addition to hiding, launching attacks, launching mortar attacks, and launching other attacks from inside civilian infrastructure.
Not from these areas. I mean, they want to launch attacks where the Israeli military is actually present and so on. Not likely, and then so that's where they could be bombed.
Right. So what he's saying, which again, logic that Matt's not going to apply, is that in many of these cases, the Israeli army, the military is engaged in these locations that have been there for a long time. And they're simply bombing the place right next to them after they claim they've done. So the end of the day, there's no logic for them to be there, even after, like we're talking about Nusrat or Rafah for that matter, any number of locations that they've already been through, occupied, bombed everywhere, destabilized, blown up all the buildings. They leave and then come back a week later and do it again. It's just there's no way you can have a brain and look at all of this and come away thinking that what they're saying makes sense. It doesn't have to mean that it's the opposite. I do think that's very clear and provable, but at the very least, you have to acknowledge that they're lying to you.
From the air and so on. I mean, you know, this thing that we keep hearing about a human shield and so on. I just want to remind you that this is basically an Israeli thing to the point where the Israeli Supreme Court told them you could not do it. You could not use Palestinian kids as human shields to wrap them around their jeeps and walk into the cities and so on. And in fact, they continue to do it.
2013, Palestinian children tortured, used as shields by Israel, per the United Nations. Reuters. Israeli soldiers who used Palestinian boy, a 9-year-old, as human shields avoid jail. Defense for Children International, an international human rights group. Israel forces use 5 Palestinian children as human shields. That's 2023.
So what possible? I mean, Israel has no credibility whatsoever to believe what they say, that there are Hamas fighters are hiding there. We have not seen any evidence. They have not shown us any of these people.
What I just said is Israel said to us they're going to release the names of militants that they have killed. If that's true, if they do it, the entire world will be able to see that. And
if it's true. Great. I guess we'll have to hope and see, right? So we'll just, in the meantime, just pretend their claims are accurate and just believe them without any evidence because they claim they'll eventually release the data. I mean, that's what he just said. How is that possible? How is that not why don't they stand up and run him out of the room? Are you serious? We're supposed to accept that you're just going to blindly side with the people being accused of genocide because they claim they'll prove it later? That's what he just said. The idea that they're going to release the names of these people, right now, they are, like with UNRWA, they're constructing, I'm going to argue, probably some shoddily put together lie that's going to fall flat right after they say it, but they are constructing something that they're going to try to release that'll make these just like every other thing they've done. I bet you it falls flat because I guess they're just that bad at this. But overall, if they had evidence that shown they were killing, they would have been waving this around left and right. The truth is they've been really desperately trying to sell you on the idea that they're just all Hamas, and that just isn't working.
Judge, but I'm going to wait until we see what happens.
Can I ask you a couple?
I forgot I wanted to point that out too.
If they do it, the entire world will be able to see that and judge, but I'm going to wait until we see what happens.
That's what I was saying a second ago. So we're going to wait and see. So you're in a wait and see mode while our children just got killed, 14 in this last bombing, 15,000 plus, but we'll wait and see, Matt. Let's wait and see how it plays out. Can you believe you just said that?
Can I ask you a couple more questions, if I may? Yesterday there was the march into Jerusalem, the old city, and so on. And, the marchers just beat the heck out of Palestinian journalists and so on. And, Palestinian journalists seem to be you know, at the tail end of recognizing whether in Gaza or in the West Bank and so on. Is there any particular reason for that?
So we have seen the videos of this incident, seen the photos of this incident, and we strongly condemn them. Journalists and media workers are essential to democracy. They should not be attacked anywhere in the world, including in Israel, for doing their jobs. We expect Israel to uphold its stated commitment to human rights and press freedom. We expect them to protect journalists from these kinds of assaults. And if there are violations of criminal law, we expect people to be fully held accountable.
And do you expect Israel to, you know, take what you just said seriously enough to actually abide by that?
Nope. I'm going to make clear what the United States expectations are, but we have shown repeatedly that we are willing to have tough conversations with Israel about these matters.
Oh, they're willing to have tough conversations that Israel completely ignores, but they're having tough conversations, Matt says. If that's the best they can do, I feel really bad for them. And I genuinely hope they end up in prison. I mean, here's the sad reality about this. We just talked about this. Here is, this was just his exchange. Oh, and I included these as well. Well, first, since I make the point he just said, we just talked about this in the last show. That was the image I used for the show. That's what he's referring to. This is a member of, what was he again? I forget. He's a journalist, right? The press breast on. He's out there covering what's going on in the West Bank. He gets attacked, mobbed by a bunch of Israeli settlers. And here is another image of this. And I think it's important to see how this got very serious, guys. Look at this. Look at what's going on. And we're going to pretend like the claims they keep trying to make about Jews on these campuses, even though they're put on by Jewish organizations and literally have Holocaust survivors standing them hand in hand, supporting, they're lying to you. And here is a real example of what they're doing in Israel to anybody that is against it, including Orthodox Jews, by the way. But a journalist, and he can't even condemn that. He has to whitewash the whole thing and wishy-washy. Well, we don't know for sure. We got to find out. We'll have hard conversations with Israel. Sad, disgusting, pathetic. As Lalel Khalil points out, their faces, their fascist laughter, the scrunched up looks of vicious racist thuggery. And she interestingly compares it to an older example. I'm not sure. Maybe this is going to ring true. Maybe that's an event that's public and famous. I don't know. But it shows a black guy getting kind of riled up and beat by a bunch of white guys. And then she highlights this. Oh, and that's just the same image. Israeli settler youth raised into such an evil death cult that real picture of them engaged in racist mob violence looks like AI rendering. It really does, especially this one. Like, if you see that, I mean, you would be, wait, is that real? It looks pretty, how is that even possible? Can you imagine that in any other context where it wouldn't be like the hugest story in the world? Imagine if this was a black guy in the United States and any other number of overlaps. This would have been everywhere in the corporate media, but not this one. And you know why. But I want to include these. Jason just put a good clip out here. And then I'll make actually a point about this that I think is important that, who was it? Somebody down here pointed out. Give them a shout out for it. RJ Phoenix. So first of all, great clip. It's a clip including in the human shield dynamic that is a 6-minute clip that breaks down my compilation of a whole lot more of the human shield overlap that has happened most just since October 7th. Real live examples of them marching them down the street with blindfolds on, shooting around them. It's crazy. He writes, and again, don't forget that, by the way, that this is there are now other people posting through the TLAV, the Last American Vagabond main account. But it says the long-standing and troubling practice of the IDF using human shields extends decades. Very provable. We have compiled numerous articles and videos documenting this hypocritical act, demonstrating that it's not solely Hamas that engage in such behavior. Now, I feel like that's still a fair statement because I've always made the claim that I find it hard to believe that they haven't. I think that's why he wrote that. But I do kind of agree with what RJ Phoenix was saying, is that seems to imply that there is evidence that, not only Hamas doing it, but if the UN wasn't able to prove that, if currently they haven't shown any evidence of it, then we shouldn't be acting like it's happening. It should just be possible. But in either way, great clip. Jason's doing an amazing job on these clips. Make sure you share these, get these out. And then I'll also include these human amnesty articles that I've shown you since the beginning, October 20th, damning evidence of war crimes. Israeli attacks wipe out entire families in Gaza, proving that they've been indiscriminately bombing civilians since the first couple of weeks or 75 years. And then, of course, the one from November 8th, horrifying cases of torture and degrading treatment of Palestinians, all, by the way, being backed up now even by corporate media. But we've known about this since November, October, even before. Just hopefully people will start to pay attention. Now, this one I think is important. We have two more segments until we wrap here. And this is about the humanitarian aid conversation. This apparently is their new spokesperson, Rachel Reserves. I guess just Rachel, anonymized. Look at that on Twitter and all. That's funny. Israel is flooding Gaza. Elon Levy says, flooding Gaza with so much aid, the UN is drowning under it. He's actually leaned into the comical thing. I mean, I've been making fun of their more aid than they've ever seen before. That's actually what they're doing at a time when they've never had less. As children are starving, as I write this, say this, talk about it. Israel is getting aid into Gaza, he says, faster than the UN can distribute it. Please follow our new citizen spokeswoman, who apparently only goes by Rachel. Why is that? I think that's very telling. But in any case, let's watch what she had to say first, which who knows if she just thinks she's on the right side, doesn't even know what's going on and just being used by the Zionist operation to parrot the things. But listen to what she says, and then I'll verifiably prove that she's lying to you or that doesn't know any better.
Wants you to believe that Israel is blocking aid from entering Gaza. That's not true. The truth is, Israel has flooded Gaza with so much aid, the UN is drowning under it.
Well, first point is that let's just pretend that you are getting it inside the Kareem Shalom crossing, which is what we can point to. It's been proven by many people that you are holding it there and not allowing them to reach it. So that's the way they play these games. Oh, we brought it in. They just can't deal with it. Or you can't reach it, or you shoot at them when they try. All been proven.
Israel is getting aid into Gaza faster than the UN can distribute it. Right now, as I'm speaking to you, there is enough food sitting inside the Gaza side of the border crossing to fill 1,000 trucks. Nobody is collecting it. Do
you know how much that breaks down to? 2 days of the bare minimum prior to October 7th. 500 a day with fuel before October 7th, and they were still food insecure. That was barely hanging on before October 7th. Now they're going 1,000, been sitting there for weeks. Okay, so if that's been more than 3 days, you're still behind. They're just playing on the ignorance of the average person. And it's not working because people like us exist, and we're hounding them on this conversation, even if it's not the most popular conversation. It's important to keep up on these things because I believe it's important.
The United Nations needs to get its act together, stop making excuses, and come collect and distribute the aid that is sitting in Gaza.
Yeah, and just get shot for it, and then they'll pretend that you're Hamas, and then it'll all circle back around again. They'll go, you're not doing it. I mean, this is the insulting part about this, many of them, but that every other angle of this conversation, even parts of the U.S. have made clear, from the executive branch even, that they are blocking aid. Biden has said this in some ways. The UN, human rights groups, World Food Program, Oxfam, UNICEF, every single angle of this has said they are provably blocking aid. And not to mention, we can watch them starving right now. It's unbelievably clear. On top of that, they've restricted. Remember the very first week, Egypt called them out, said you're restricting the aid. You bombed aid trucks. You bombed the crossing. And we can't remember that. We act like that doesn't play in this conversation. And now we're watching them restrict the aid that comes through, letting it rot when it sits there. Settlers are coming in and dumping the aid in the ground, stomping on it, having raves and parties. And that's not supposed to factor into this. How does any of that play into we're just giving them and they can't get it? You can't even talk about the provable examples because they are desperate. Desperate. If just any one of those alone shows you that it's not as simple as we're bringing it, they won't take it. Every one of those examples proves to you that they're deliberately, officially, because even the settlers have been guarded by IDF members, making this happen and then lying about it. So not just starving them, but starving them and then asking for credit and praise. The worst of the worst. Okay, let's talk about it. Here is this clip. This is being posted also by Israeli citizen spokesperson. Apparently, they're making all these random new accounts. How silly. Israel's flooding Gaza with so much aid. Same thing. Elon Levy just shared it himself and then lied about it because that's what he does. Well, this was just the same point we're making before. This is the executive director for the Legal Center for Freedom of Movement, highlighting the same thing we all know. Kogat is literally dumping the goods on the side of the Kareem Shalom crossing, or any of them for that matter, which cannot be reached by Israel without Israel's coordination. And then they mock them for not being able to reach it for lack of coordination. During a famine, they're making these manipulative jokes, or not really jokes when they're really doing it. Or they, as we've said, shoot at anybody that they see as related to UNRWA. But then right now they're going, Why isn't UNRWA getting the food? This is how dumb this is. They keep telling you that they're all Hamas and that they're going to shoot anybody that's Hamas. And even the United States has said, please stop shooting the security guards. And then they just go, they won't even do it. So there's one of two things happening. Like, there's three things actually happening. They are restricting their access to it. They are shooting them when they get close to it. But there's also the dynamic of whether they might not go close to it because they know they're going to get shot. But you still have to realize all of that is the deliberate creation of Israel in order to make it look like it's their fault, even though everybody in the world knows it's their fault. Now, here are the overlaps from May 31st going all the way up to June 5th from the United Nations. Again, showing you that it's even gone down, not the other way around. So the breakdown here, again, is to show you that 500 trucks, including fuel, were the average before October 7th. And again, they were food insecure at that time. So anything less than 500 a day going forward was guaranteed to pull them closer to starvation. And that's why, and again, the daily average is at the bottom. They averaged daily 9 food trucks from the 7th of October to the 31st. 9. Down from 500. So they really kickstarted that famine. And then the highest they got over the process was 213 averaged a day in May. Oh, really from May 1st to the May 6th. That's it. That's it, 213. So less than half of what was needed to maintain that. So still going to starvation. Now, in May from the 7th to the 30th, as they're screaming, they've dumped more on them than they've ever had before. They averaged 60 a day. 60. Now, let's go all the way to June 5th, because this is what they're talking about, and see what it says now. It's down to 46 from June 1st to June 3rd. 91 in May overall. 91 from 500. And they're telling you that they've done so much aid. They are flat out lying to you guys. And it's not just because the UN says it. It's because of every data point other than Israel says is highlighting what I see as the truth, but what we can clearly prove on the ground. But either way, all of the data points everywhere. Journalists, human rights groups, United Nations, even representatives of other governments, other aid workers, doctors have said they are doing this. And Israel just goes, you're all racist. And that's supposed to win the day? It's pretty sad. Now here's Oxfam. As they're claiming they've dumped more aid here than ever, and they're restricting it, they're saying Israel's relentless bombardment and deliberate obstruction of humanitarian response is making it virtually impossible for aid agencies to reach trapped, starving civilians in Gaza. If famine is declared, it's already too late, they say. Martin Griffiths from the United Nations Relief Chief, he's UN Relief Chief, says, in Gaza, delivering aid has become almost impossible. We are nowhere near where we need to be. So that's about getting aid to and then delivering it on top of that. They're not letting this happen. It says we need all border crossings open. Again, there's not even all the crossings open. We need safe and unimpeded access. Before recently, there was only one, if actually none for a while. They've occupied parts of the Rafah crossing, which is illegal. Everything they're doing, everything. Now here are some sad examples. 9 out of every 10 children in Gaza is suffering from severe malnutrition. Here's one of these horrible examples that are really hard to look at. And this is the one we just talked about. This is from May 31st. And this is when the U.S. was falsifying, according to their own people, Gaza aid reports in order to hide the fact that they were stopping aid. So not only do you have the evidence on the side we just discussed, you've got the U.S. government getting caught lying about their own reports to hide the real thing. It's just so shockingly obvious. Here's The Guardian from June 5th. Starvation already causing many deaths and lasting harm in Gaza. Just keep lying, Israel. It's not going to work. This is from Rami Abdul. 5-year-old Hana Al-Rai from Gaza is suffering from dehydration, malnutrition, liver and spleen enlargement, and diabetes. She cannot receive treatment due to the destruction of Gaza's hospitals by Israel and the occupation of the Rafah crossing. This is what's going on. Look at this girl. There's no way to pretend this is not happening. And guys, this hasn't even gotten close to what we were dealing with in Yemen. It's going to get worse. I guarantee it if we allow this to continue. And Abby Martin simply highlights Waqas Tufail's tweet that says, this is nothing short of horrific. The same article, which by the way, they just, removed the image. You can see, Twitter totally not playing along. Starvation is already causing mass death in Gaza. 2 UN organizations say that more than 1 million people are expected to face death by starvation. 1 million people. And as she writes, the world is watching millions in Gaza starve to death, and our leaders are still rationalizing this as necessary and justified. That is really the worst part I've said from the beginning. Not just that they're letting it happen, but they're calling it a good thing. They're saying this is freedom. This is democracy. This is defending yourself. This is going to change. You know, I think the positive reverberation of the fighting back is going to change things in positive ways, but just them pushing this for so long is going to change a lot of bad things in the wrong direction too for a long time. I worry about that. They're just rattling off some lies to finish up here, right? Here's what we keep seeing. Aviva Klampas. And same thing as just stating a bunch of text on Twitter and then saying, see, can't you distinguish between the truth because I lie and then there's all this evidence? This is what they keep doing. Aviva Klampas writes on the 5th, isn't a surprise to nobody. The IDF located a rocket launcher concealed by a structure with a UNICEF logo. Well, what does that even prove in the first place, if it's even real? That there's a piece of wood with a UNICEF logo on it that could have been used? I mean, these people will show you anything. Because that's because the strategy of Gaza terrorists abuse all humanitarian facilities, then scream war crimes. Or it's not even real, or that's a faked image, or it's something you put there. I mean, this is exactly what they do. I mean, it certainly could be the case. My point is, for how many times they've lied, it's just impossible not to see that they are constantly putting out unverifiable evidence-free claims. And this person down here highlights what she also tweeted about there is a list. She says, just like the Hamas guard list in the hospital, which she also tweeted about, and says, found in the basement of this children's hospital, a schedule showing the names of terrorists. Except that wasn't the truth, which is why she deleted it, because it was actually just a calendar with the days of the week on it. That's it. Anybody speaking Arabic saw that right away. And you think she didn't know that? She just lied because that's what her job is, just like we're talking about here. Or you get these examples. Embassy of the United States or Israel of the U.S. says a Hamas tunnel shaft built under a little girl's room in Rafah. Well, how do we know it's Rafah? How do we know it's a little girl's room? How do we know it's actually a tunnel and not something you just did 30 seconds ago? Because we don't. Because they just keep stating things with red circles and whatever else and saying truth. They don't care to prove any of it because usually that implies that they know they're not telling the truth. And as this person posts the same thing, Wilkerson saying they lie about everything. And Elon Levy doing the same thing because they usually get the same talking points given at the same day and they all say the same thing. Sometimes monsters hide under the bed. Oh, you're so clever. I just don't know why we think we can prove any of this. And here's one that you might have seen as well. Israel's main account saying some of you might store some clothes or toys under your beds. In Rafah, all Rafah, of course, because nothing else matters when they want you to fixate on what they're currently murdering, right? Currently bombing to death, currently ethnically cleansing. So apparently because they show some metal things under a bed that we don't even know is in Rafah, that means you can kill children, right? Even if those were rockets, it still does not make what they're doing legal. But it says in Hamas, or in Rafah, Hamas stores weapons under children's bed. They've already played this game. They've already been caught lying about one of them. So I don't know why we would pretend that these are true. But here's a clip. Oh, I didn't grab this actually. Of this person highlighting in 1948, Israeli militias, surprise, surprise, were hiding weapons in schools, hospitals, religious buildings. By the way, it's what they do now, guys. They keep getting caught doing that right now in Gaza, or that they've done that a long time. The Al-Shifa hospital, the tunnels they built were why the hospital was being used. Even former Prime Minister Ehud Barak admitted that on an interview with CNN. So it's like ignoring their human shield practice while claiming the other side's using human shields. Certainly possible they're doing it too, but you're ignoring what you're doing.
I've never seen these signs that are dotted literally all around Israel that say that early Zionist militia groups used schools, hospitals, and religious buildings to hide weapons and train militia groups.
There is a list.
So for a bit of context, this alleged use of civilian infrastructure by Hamas for military functions has been a very controversial issue throughout this war, with such claims being used to justify Israel's deadly and indiscriminate bombing on Gaza. But Zionist paramilitary groups actually used civilian infrastructure for military purposes prior to the establishment of the State of Israel, and over 70 years later, they're not hiding it. And it seems they're still proud of it because there's signs and plaques dotted all around some Israeli communities. A bit like this secret arms cache or hidden weapon storage in the basement and attic of this synagogue, which the Tel Aviv municipality still conveniently commemorates with this sign in both Hebrew and English. And the Bialik school building in Netanya, which has a sign reading "Training by various underground movements took place in the school." A cave in the school was used as a hiding place for weapons. Another school in Tel Aviv doubled as a training center in light weapons, and as another arms cache for the Haganah Zionist militia group. And then you've got this building, which also housed a hospital commemorating Zionist militia groups using the building as their headquarters with this sign. And that Zionist militia group was the Etzel, also known as the Irgun, known for carrying out multiple massacres of Palestinians in 1948. Also designated a terrorist group, also whose logo included Jordan as part of Israel. And a sign outside this synagogue in a neighborhood in Tel Aviv which says under the stairs leading to the women's section was a secret arms cache for illegal weapons of the Haganah during the British rule. Then you've also got this sign outside the Reading power station in Tel Aviv which housed the technical office of the TASS, the military industry founded by the Haganah, one of many underground arms facilities which used the machines and equipment of the building they hid in to manufacture weapons. And then you've got both the gymnasiums for the Balfour High School and the Ahad Chaim School for Boys in Tel Aviv, which were both used as training sites for the Haganah, and both also housed secret arms caches. So this list goes on and on, but here's some things to keep in mind as Israel accuses Hamas of the same things that it once did. These militia groups were deemed as
that it still does, which is verifiable.
Terrorist organizations which killed Palestinians in order to establish the State of Israel in 1948. And those same pre-state army groups went on to form the Israeli Defense Force, also known as the IDF.
Very easy to prove. I mean, these things are undeniable. I mean, this is the crazy reality of this. It's like the thing that Robert just highlighted in his article about Bill Maher lying about all these things that, you know, he called the women's freedom discussion, right? Where they talk about the point they always make in this is the hijab law and everything else. Well, that there is no hijab law in Gaza. The reality is that there is conservative religious areas that feel that's the way it's supposed to be done, but there's no laws in place, except in Israel, there are very clear pressure from Orthodox Jews and women to hide their hair from their families. So it's just this overlapping lie about everything. Now, here's another ending point that one we've already highlighted before. Hanania Naftali just decided to push this lie out again. You've seen this more than once. This was posted on June 4th. Remember this? The fake teeth that dentist called out? He just used it again. I don't even know what's supposed to be in there. It's like a bunch of driftwood and rock. But he goes, the remains of murdered Jewish children from Kibbutz Be'eri. Do you realize how stupid this is? While we know that there were only so many children that were there and none of them, I mean, this has been debunked by Haaretz. The simple reality of how many got killed, but then also the idea that they're highlighting the teeth. That's what they claim these were. You know how I know that? Because here is Elon Levy saying this on October 31st. These are the murdered Israeli children of Kibbutz Be'eri. That's why they keep pushing the lie that's already been debunked. They were tortured, dismembered, then burned to death, all of which were lies. Even their own people have admitted this now. Archaeologists are sifting through the rubble to find their teeth. Archaeologists? He got made fun of like crazy for that. Archaeologist, what a moron. The bottom line is this was not true. And I even highlighted the time on the 31st. I said, where have I seen that before? Remember this story? The fake story from Ukraine where they did the same thing that were proven in the story to be a fake story? It's pathetic. But here is PVT saying these teeth, the ones that do not belong to children. Why? Because a dentist chimed in and said, which by the way, I've checked this myself. Those are not children's teeth. In fact, those aren't even teeth. That is actually bridge and porcelain crown. Kids are not given both. Children's teeth are large and in width with very small roots. These are fake adult teeth. Burnt teeth don't look like that, by the way. Oops. Now, what's interesting about that is that original tweet that got a lot of attention. Guess what? The account's now gone. What a surprise. Twitter playing its role, right? But don't worry, because other people have chimed in, and this person simply says, finally, I get to use my dental degree to debunk Zionist lies, going back to the same point. But it's easy to prove, guys. This was broken down. He was publicly embarrassed by this story. But now, Hanania Naftali just goes, let's play this one today. Let's see what they say about it, just pushing the same lie. Now, of course, removing all the other parts of it that we know for an absolute fact are lies. Torture, dismembered, burned to death, specific lies that have been shown to not to have happened. They don't care. It's going to keep pushing the same lies. And the worst part is it using examples of things that we know for a fact aren't even real. Probably why it's a little bit fuzzy, so it's harder to tell. Those are crowns, those are fake teeth. None of them are for children. But that's what he says. That's how ridiculous this is. Oh, and I discussed it in this show back from December 27th, 2023, if you want to watch it. Here's an interesting post from ICJP. saying British-born Israeli ex-government official accused of international law violations in criminal complaint issued to Scotland Yard war crime unit. What's interesting is they fail to mention who it is, but I think we can guess, right? Who is the only is British-born ex-government official? Well, you know who that is. This person says, riddle me this. Who's got a rope dungeon for a brain, ears of a goblin, and a mouth of gobles? This guy. This is what we're talking about. So actually great to hear that this guy is being officially investigated, at least in Scotland, by Scotland Yard, for war crimes. Why? Because he's a war criminal, guys. That's the truth. And they are finally going after these people. And George Galloway highlights a couple of points on this, that Tommy Robinson apparently is funded by the Israel lobby, which shouldn't surprise anybody. This guy gets pulled right back into the conversation right before this or right when it starts. I mean, very interesting how all this is going. Now, on the note of information that is incorrect, I thought it was important to highlight that. And I honestly am not seeing any much from one side of this or the other than the Israeli constant lies about this, but this is one that I saw and I thought it was important to point out. So Solomon Ahmed, which who knows if it's intentional or not, highlights this and says, death to Arabs, may your village burn, Muhammad is dead, a Jew is a soul, an Arab is a son of a whore, kind of a thing. That's what they claiming that they're all saying in this massive protest. Now, apparently, and this is what other Israelis, and this one is from Alon Mizrahi, who is constantly criticizing Israel. He says that's not what they're actually saying here. He says, we hate it when Israel distorts Arabic. There's no need to do it to Hebrew. And this person says, so what are they saying? He's saying some passages from Psalms. So what's important here, and it could just be because somebody shared that to him and he thought that's what they said. I mean, I don't know Hebrew. The point is that it's easy in this time frame to trust somebody and do it, which is why I'm constantly saying that we have to be, even people you trust, question everything. Either way, the point is that it's happening everywhere. So just be careful. Even people that you're watching that are saying the things that we agree with, realize that they could be accidentally doing it or it could be deliberate. I don't know, but just be careful. Because there's a lot of people, there's a lot of information flying around that is not accurate. Now, to end, Lens Veritas highlights, Spain has now become the second European country to join South Africa in the genocide case against Israel. It's a big deal. The first was Ireland. Now it's Spain. It's only going to keep going. Tiberius highlights that after the Maldives basically revoked passport for Israelis going to their country, which apparently they have a pretty high tourism rate from Israel, the UK says gives military and political support to countless war crimes, which they have, has long history of war crimes, invaded 171 of 193 countries. Telegraph, silence. Maldives, no Israeli can enter since they're all war criminals. Telegraph, the Maldives has tempestuous politics, meaning basically, what was it again, like characterized by strong or turbulent conflicting emotion. Like, so his point is, and that's what they say right there, hardline Islamic state with tempestuous politics. Like, how ridiculous. You can sit there and stare at your government that's constantly committing war crimes, but they actually stand up on the right side of things and you call them a problem. That's how bad we are right now. Like, in the society we're in. But here is an important reality of Colombian president. Now, whether you agree with him or not, it's a huge statement. He literally says, Nazis are back in power and they are taking their revenge. Colombian president says, Gaza is their laboratory, but they won't stop until they make all of humanity into an enslaved robot. Now, you could argue he's being bellicose or hyperbolic, but as we said before, there's far more interesting overlap than we realize to the Zionist organization and Nazis, even the U.S. government, Operation Paperclip, and so on. So maybe there is more to it. Maybe he's just making that claim because they embody what Nazis were. It's up to you to decide. Either way, it's a big statement to make. A lot of countries are shifting dynamics here. Now, Israel activists in Israel have now occupied the German embassy in Tel Aviv. They are holding up signs that say, don't you have enough blood on your hands? Never again is never again for anyone. But they're dragging them out because even Jews get attacked in Israel if they don't align with Zionism, which is the real point we're making all the time, that Zionism is what this is about. But what we're trying to show on top of that is even in Israel, everywhere in the world, this is falling apart for the Zionist government. Here is somebody in the United States, a U.S. Air Forceman, is that what you say, or Air Force member? It says, my name is Juan Betancourt. I'm a member of the U.S. Air Force, currently seeking separation from the military as a conscientious objector. My strong moral objection to the genocide in Gaza has brought me to this juncture where I must speak out despite the reprisal it may bring. Good for him. Whether you agree with him or not, you know that takes courage. And the bottom line is, every which way you look, this is coming down on the U.S., on Israel, on anybody that is part of the people committing genocide or allowing it or turning a blind eye to it. Mohammed Shihada highlights the French lawmaker highlights the participation of 4,185 French citizens in Israel's assault on Gaza. 4,000 French citizens. Like, let's pretend like this isn't much bigger than we realize. Calls for their criminal prosecution if they took part in war crimes. Ukrainian, Italian, German, U.S., and French mercenaries are reportedly serving in the AF in Gaza. That should not be okay with anybody. And this is what's happening. And he also highlights the South Africa has now become the first state to threaten consequences for citizens serving in the IDF, while the entire civilized West is condoning its citizens taking part in the perpetuation of serious crimes against humanity. What the UN experts call a genocide in the making. Caitlin Johnstone ends with, nobody really supports Israel. They just support their own dopey political factions, their own dopey religious beliefs, their own continued campaign donations from the Israeli lobby. Everything about Israel is fake, right down to its network of public support, which we just highlighted. Fake social media campaigns to influence politicians, fake politician campaigns to influence politicians, all happening in front of you. Final point to Tiberius to end with the paradox, he says, of the U.S. and Israel. Now, this should be self-evident, but I like the way he frames it. The paradox of the U.S. and Israel generally is that they kill everyone in the way who has the audacity to demand justice or equity or human rights, then continue pretending that they care about justice and equity and human rights, as their entire existence depends on this lie. Simple, right? But I think it's important because it's just about the most obvious thing in the world right now, and I'm really hoping we can start paying attention more and more to this. It's important, guys. I know you know that. I know that's why you're here. So thank you for continuing to support this platform, because we are under attack like never before, but we're not going to stop. It's important. As I've said many times, I'm beginning to sense that there will be repercussions for me doing this for the rest of my life. And I'm accepting that, because this is one of the most important things I've ever been involved with in my entire life, whether it's TLAV in general or just this topic we're dealing with now. I think this is the kind of thing. It goes back to the larger, the overlap that people made during COVID, and they're also making during this discussion. If you wondered what you would have done during World War II, you now know. And it applied during the COVID-19 part, but way more clearly around the Israel-Gaza conversation. You know who you would have been then by what you're doing now. And I believe most people can see that at this point, and they are mostly choosing the right side. I mean, obviously my opinion, but I think it's pretty objectively what the right side is, the side of not committing genocide. I think that's very clear. And I'm just happy to see that people are continuing to highlight this, but the consequences from, just like with COVID-19, even though we clearly turned out to be correct and people are still fired, people still lost their jobs, military personnel, I think it's important to see that those consequences are being put down almost out of spite, whether it's from the Israeli propaganda side or your own government in the same interest. I just want you guys to think about that there will be consequences in some cases, but do you think it's important enough to accept that, to fight it in hopes that you can circumvent it, but just owning the fact that this is important enough to risk that? It's like in a wartime situation, that if you believe you're over there fighting, you risking your life to fight for these things. It's obviously not a lethal discussion from where we're sitting. Obviously could eventually get to that point, but my point is that it's important to weigh those consequences and realize that things in life can be important enough to risk losing because you believe in them. And I think that's what most people are coming to terms with around this, is that we need to start recognizing that it's not about being comfortable and having all the trappings of what we call Western society. It's about recognizing that there's a hell of a lot of people in the world that haven't even been offered the opportunity to achieve those things because of your government. And that's in no way to talk about some collectivist mindset that we have a responsibility as the people to make sure everybody else is the same. It's simply just to acknowledge that your government has held them in a position that they don't want to be in for the interest of your government, not even for you. It's just time to own that and try to work away from that and fight for the people that have always been held in a position of starvation, of deprivation, of attacks, of, I mean, God, everything we could talk about, all the horrible things they're doing right in front of us. Day after day after day, talked about Yemen, the African continent in general, even well before the United States, Britain, and so on. This is something we're trying to fight away from. I believe we have an opening here. I know you see it as well. So thank you for that support and continuing to highlight this information. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusion. Stay vigilant.
But now let's look at the Hamas Charter. The Hamas Charter was written by maybe half a dozen people in 1988 at a moment of an extreme Israeli attack on Gaza. It has no status. They've repeated over and over again that it doesn't apply anymore. And if you're interested in charters, why keep to that? Take the governing party in Israel, Likud. It grew out of Cherut. That's its ideological center, Begin's Cherut, Netanyahu's Cherut. Its position, never changed, is that the land of Israel, that the entire land of Israel belongs to the Jews. That includes today's Jordan, okay? In fact, the old slogan was, both sides of the Jordan. That's ours, and this is too. They've never changed that. So that's their charter. Did anybody pay attention to it? Of course not. Then came the January election, and Israel intensified its attack with U.S. support. After that, there are repeated attacks, Israeli attacks, and ceasefires agreements. Every ceasefire agreement is approximately like what I read. What happens is Israel completely dismisses and disregards it, maintains the siege in violation of the ceasefire, increases the violence. Hamas lives up to it, and Israel officially accepts that agrees to that, until some escalation of Israeli violence leads to a Hamas reaction, and then another episode of mowing the lawn. That's been going on since November 2005. Hamas is not a nice organization. They do a lot of rotten things. That's for the Palestinians to worry about. But it has nothing to do with us. If we were supporting Hamas, nothing, zero. If we were supporting Hamas, it would be our problem. But we're not. And what they do is for Palestinians to deal with. What we deal with is what we are doing, which is supporting massive criminal operations all over the region, blocking peace. That's for us to be concerned about.